Public meeting. I'm Raj Shane, the chair of the ICB. One apology is from Dr. Rankin, otherwise I've had no further apologies. Are there any declarations of interest that have not been noted relevant to today's agenda? No? Okay, thank you. So you can see in front of you a chair's report or a chair's announcement, and I'm just going to pick a couple of things out of that. We would not begin this meeting without commenting on the announcements that were made on the 13th of March in terms of the changes to NHS England and the impact that some of those changes are likely to have on the Cheshire and Merseyside ICB and very close to my heart on the staff of the ICB. The announcement was leaked and that has an unfortunate consequence on the level of anxiety that it causes with staff, and I'll apologise to staff on NHS England's behalf on that, but I know Graham and the team are working rapidly and as hard as they can to give staff the support that they need and to give the clarity to staff that we are able to give. And we're hoping that NHS England will move at pace to help us understand what the requirements are and what support we can offer staff during this very, very challenging time for them. Okay, so I would also like to, I'm really pleased to announce the appointment of our new chief exec. People have heard at previous meetings that Graham is retiring in June, and we'll say a few words about Graham in due course, or mostly polite. And we've appointed a lady called Cathy Elliott, who will start with us soon, just confirming her start date. And we're looking forward to that. It's a really good and important appointment. I'd also like just to take the opportunity to welcome Mike Burrows as our new non-executive director. Mike has got a long and distinguished history in the NHS as well as working in innovation nationally and on a regional basis. So welcome, Mike, and thank you for joining us. And people will know you won't know. The consequent why Mike is here is because Neil Large is taking up an interim role at the Countess of Cheshire as the chair of that challenged organisation. So I'll stop there. I think there's a few other things in my report that people can read at their leisure. And I think I'm going to go to a film which is the experience and achievement story, primarily related to our cancer services.
A term used within the cancer community is scanxiety. Now, this is where you experience high anxiety levels due to waiting on scan results. For myself personally, I have scans every 3 months, and then I usually wait around 3 to 4 weeks for the results of those scans. In that space of time, the anxiety that I experience is extremely high. I know that it wouldn't make sense, but in my mind, I can't help but let it run away with the possibilities of what if my cancer has spread? What if it's got bigger? What if my treatment is no longer working? What if I need to go on to a more aggressive form of treatment? And all of these thoughts will run through my mind for a good solid 3 weeks. Up until I get my results, really, and then fingers crossed it's always, for me up to now, been stable. But that still doesn't stop your mind from going away with you and experiencing all those horrible thoughts and emotions whilst you're waiting for those results. I suppose it'd be nice if they could give us the results a little bit quicker instead of making us wait as long as we do. But until then, until they can do that, scanxiety, it's very real, and it is something that most, if not all, cancer patients will experience. And it's a term that's been coined within the cancer community that I have learned.
Thanks, John. We'll hear from John shortly for helping us put that video together. Poignant story, some good pictures. Graham.
Thank you, Chair. I was going to start in the same place as you, and the announcement of the abolition of NHS England. The announcement that NHS England, whilst it will take 2 years for them to be abolished, because that requires an Act of Parliament to take place, it was also included within that announcement that they would be reducing their costs by 50% in a similar time order to the ask of ICBs to reduce their running costs. Now, at the time of writing this report, and again, not only at the time of writing this report, but as of today, there is no further confirmed detail on either how these changes will be measured or any clarity around redefining roles or clarifying the roles. Now, I have heard repeatedly from our political and corporate leaders that ICBs are here to stay, but I am also hearing that there will be some redefinition and clarity around the tasks ascribed to our organisation. So it's an unsettling time. It's an unsettling time for people who sit around this table at the board, and as you say, Chair, it's an unsettling time for all of our staff. We will manage that in the most effective way possible. What I would also say to you, though, is I have seen many of these things happen before, and the NHS always comes back out the other side of it. It comes out the other side of it stronger, but of course that doesn't help for many of our staff who weren't here last time we went through a reorganisation, or perhaps weren't here for any of these 6 reorganisations that I think I have seen during my career. So we'll manage it sensitively, but time is of the essence, and clearly a lot of this is associated with government's confidence with things like the Treasury, things like the bond market, and the state of public finances in this country. So even though we don't have that lack of clarity, the one thing I am very clear about is the expectation is this organisation will look very different by Q3 of the coming financial year. So I'm sorry that that's not a clear message. We will try and make that as clear and supportive as we can to the board and to our staff over the coming days and weeks. I don't want to dwell on a number of issues in the report, but I did just want to highlight that within the report we have published a very headline summary of our staff survey results. Now, it's a national staff survey. It's conducted in every ICB in the country. It's conducted on the basis that we don't provide frontline services. It's conducted on virtually the identical questions that it's conducted in every NHS trust in the country. And we're really pleased that our results are either identical to or an improvement on last year. And I think there's just one result or 2 results where there's been a tiny statistical drop, but you know they're in the hundredths of a percent, those drops in the performance. But in some regards, it's something that we should be proud of, because running a dispersed organisation with staff based over almost 20 locations to get such positive staff results is a good thing. But actually at the same time, when we have just had a public announcement and our staff think that the numbers within the organisation are going to be reduced so significantly, in any way, shape or form, trying to celebrate these staff survey results would be a poor or crass thing for us to do. I'm not going to dwell on it, but we have just put a very high-level summary in here about the GP's national contract for 25-26. We are really pleased that the government swiftly reached a settlement and agreement with the GPs. Now, it is a one-year deal only, and again, the intention is to develop a new contract, a completely new contract, which will get GPs back into a longer-term settlement with government, commencing from 26-27. But really good to see the investment in primary care, really good to see the contract settled and agreed with the GPs without further industrial action, and really good that even before this agreement was reached, we were starting to see the first signs of some positive movement in improved access to GP services within our communities. So something that is laying the foundations for the future, and we're pleased about. I've also highlighted in here the publication of the NHS England's guide to neighbourhood health. We know that neighbourhood health teams is going to be a core plank of the 10-year plan when it's published, and it gives us the time to start thinking about how we set objectives and direction for each of our place teams and place partnerships as we move into a new financial year. Now, of course, the 10-year plan, when published, we think the publication is still in May, will set this out much clearer, but it really is important that people start to think in the future way that we're going to work and to start thinking about the future space. Also included in my report was a kind of substantive explanation of the question that Justin Madders MP has asked us about the future of long COVID services. I don't want to preempt what the Finance Director is going to say to you later in the meeting, but people have to understand that the financial context for public services, all public services, is extremely challenged and extremely difficult at the moment. We had temporary funding for lots of things during the COVID period, and over the last 2 to 3 years, nearly all of that funding has now been stripped from our budgets. So whilst it might have been nice to carry on with services that were set up during COVID, the reality is the funding is not there for them, and therefore we have to manage those services back into business as usual. And that will mean for many of the people being looked after under the long COVID service heading, that they will be picked up by another specialist service if appropriate, or they will be returned to what will be management by their GP. Sorry. Update on our gluten consultation, which will come back to the board next time, and I will leave it there, Chair.
Before I open up to questions and comments, I think if you could just bring to life the extension of the joint agreement, controller agreement, because we're seeking approval, I think, on that one.
Can I ask Claire to do that while I cough?
Okay, where's Claire? There you are, Claire.
Thank you. So you'll remember we took on responsibility for delegated specialised commissioning last year, and the NHS England team were proposing to be moved to Langston South Cumbria as a commissioning hub. Not because of the changes that have been recently discussed around NHS England. There was an extension, or an ask for an extension for the team to remain within NHS England before coming to Langston South Cumbria in July 2025. So the attachment, the email letter and section 5 of Graham's report just asks for permission from the board to support that. It doesn't change business as usual. It's just the sort of formality of keeping the team within NHS England.
Understood. So quickly, can I seek board support for that? Is that all nods? Yep, thank you. So go on to any questions on comments on Graham's report. Steve?
Well, first of all, on the comments about NHSE and the changes, I mean, there is a lot of anxiety and uncertainty out in the whole of the health and social care sector about the implications, and as soon as we're able to give some reassurance what this means in practice, the better. Just on paragraph 11.1, the neighbourhood health model, just how local government, in particular health and wellbeing boards, are going to be involved in developing and shaping the approach to that. Have you got any thoughts on that at this stage, Graham, please?
Claire, do you want to take that?
Yes, I can do. Actually, myself, Alison and Carl are sort of co-leading this work for the ICB. It's quite early days. We've got a steering group about to be established looking after each of the 6 core component parts. And if you remember, probably a couple of meetings ago, we talked about coterminosity and looking at mapping. So there's a piece of work each of the place directors and place teams have been asked to do with their local authorities to look at how they map. It's not just about the sort of geography, it's about the services and the provision within those. So that piece of work is happening, Steve, and will continue to happen. It's very much a joint piece of work. This isn't the NHS and the ICB imposing a way of working on any of the partners. We do have to deliver against the 6 core components, which you can see there, but obviously most of those, if not all of those, are partnership, and we'll be working very closely with local authorities. So you've got our commitment that we'll be doing that.
Thanks, Graham. Perhaps Carl or Alison, just bring to life what that co-working means in practice for us.
Yeah, thank you. Oh, sorry. Yeah, thank you. So no, I agree with Claire. I think we've also reached out, haven't we, through the Directors of Adult Social Care and Children's Services to get them to be part of that at a Cheshire Mersey level as well. I mean, I can give an example about what we're doing in Knowsley. So we have got, it was the main discussion at our Place Partnership Board, that's chaired by our Council Chief Executive. We talked about the geography, but as importantly is who's going to actually help deliver those 6 components. Some of those absolutely are to be done at Place with our Place partners. Some are probably better led, the population health management system at Cheshire Mersey level, for example. I think we've got really good responses from our voluntary sector to be involved, from our provider partners, likely through the collaboratives to be part of this. I think the self-assessment that Claire's referred to has to be co-produced at that Place level, and then we will be bringing a report back here to update the board on that, as well as, you're right, Steve, to health and wellbeing boards as well. Thank you.
Carl?
And just to add to that from a Warrington perspective, and I think we're similar to most of our places. I don't think this is greenfield work. We are already doing things. So in Warrington, we have our integrated neighbourhood team programme. Now, we've always had that. It's been quite challenging in the last year because of the work we've been doing around urgent emergency care recovery. But one of the things that this approach helps with is things like stronger community services, modern general practice, because what we find, if you just work on your integrated neighbourhood teams, if you haven't got strong community services, you've got nowhere to refer your patients to once you've case found them and are working in a multidisciplinary team way. And modern general practice is really key in that, and a really good population health management tool and approach helps. And I think that's where Cheshire and Mersey at scale, we are developing that. And for me, neighbourhood health starts at neighbourhoods, but those tools and support that we can give across Cheshire and Merseyside will really help.
Thanks, Carl. Hilary, is it your question on that? Or I've just got Ruth signalling.
Mine is.
Can I take Ruth first and then I'll come back to you?
I just wanted to follow up. It's really good that we're thinking about system-wide perspectives, but also local variation, if you like, responsive to need. It could be quite mechanistic. We look at the 6 components. What I'd be really keen to make sure we do is that we have service user perspectives that are holistic in how we connect these together in a way that makes sense for the public, and actually use patient experience or service user experience to drive the improvements that we want at local level. So these are not separate components, but actually part of that comprehensive holistic approach. So how are you going to weave in the service user experience into this and use it to inform a co-produced solution?
Thanks, Ruth. So again, I think each place will be different because each place is different because the needs are, but certainly, and I've got David from Health Watch Knowsley across the table from me here, getting the voices, the people who use our services is really important. So we do work with and ask Health Watch to do specific pieces of work and bring the voice and the stories and the narratives of people through. It's wider than that. We've got a lot of partnership forums within place that we can draw on. We have a joint committee with the local authority that pulls that all together. But you're right, it almost is one of the enablers that has to underpin all of those components. You're right, otherwise it could just be a tick list of unrelated components, couldn't it?
Thanks, Alison. Hilary?
I want to comment and ask a question about long COVID arrangements, future arrangements. And we know research tells us that people from certain cultural backgrounds, people with mental health and LD, have poorer access, experience and outcomes of long COVID. So the independent report that's mentioned here, can we pull out in that independent report, what does that mean for Cheshire and Merseyside, for those cohorts of people? And there's a reference here to the expert panel as well, and I'm looking for assurance that, again, those people are represented on that panel. Thank you.
Right.
We will absolutely pull out that data and share that back with you. And as far as I can see, the piece of work that is being undertaken in this area by our teams is very thorough and comprehensive. So I will go back and check out the expert panel question. But given everything else that we've kind of scrutinised because of the questions on this, I expect it to be in a good place.
Thanks, Graham.
Thank you. Erica?
Can I just make two comments actually on the things that you've discussed today? So the first one was the staff survey, and it's about freedom to speak up. So we have made progress around awareness in the staff survey. What we've definitely got to do more work on is how as an organisation we evidence that we've learnt, so we're a learning organisation from those. So I know we've got some best practices around the system, so I'll be approaching people on that. So it's just an update on that. The second one is really about primary care. So we've got primary care in April. This is very focused on the continuation of the work that we've done on GP access. So we will have a data set that will help us to assess the variation across all of the places, and we'll do that with places. And we've also got the report from Healthwatch. So it's all the 9 individuals. So what does it actually feel like in their communities now for GP access? That will be pulled together and it's coming to board in May. Thank you.
Thanks, Erica. It's really important. Can I just ask appropriate and Director a question on the vaccination programme? So we can see in Graham's report the COVID vaccination programme being launched. I guess what we could see from last year's figures is that we could improve. What's likely to be different this year that helps us improve? Who's that? Ian?
Thank you. So at last board we discussed starting some behavioural insight work with our workforce. We saw the reductions and that started already, so we plan to bring that back into the next summer board about understanding what that means to our staff and workforce and what we can do to encourage that area. There is also, it does link a little bit into the Cancer Alliance update later on around the delegations of screening and immunisations that are also forthcoming to us. We've committed to, many of you have heard about the positive outcomes from our Live Well service that we showcased nationally the other month as well, and trying to make sure that we reduce those barriers to access in our community in that space. We have established something called a screening and immunisation oversight group, which has membership from all our local authority partners in there, the Cancer Alliance as well. So it's about trying to join those things up, getting ready, particularly one look towards winter as well. There should also be a reference to our colleagues in the region have commissioned a new school-age immunisation service that we're going to be working closely with them to make sure that that is as effective as possible in our local areas too.
Okay, and thank you. I think just see board members' view on this. I think it would be useful for you to bring a report back to the board in May, perhaps before the summer, on what are different ways of working to improve our vaccination rates, not for staff obviously in terms of the NHS, but it's the population focus given what we experienced last year. Ian, if you just bring that to life for us and let's understand the key deliverables in terms of actions and milestones you'll have in place to help us improve our vaccination rates for the things that we're responsible for.
I'll work with the schedule. Obviously the insight work is going over a number of weeks to get to, so we want to make sure we get the right information back before we bring it to board, but we'll make sure we try and get that as speedy as possible.
If you set a date, you set the date by which it comes out, and then let's hear. Okay. Thank you. Okay, any other questions or comments? Right.
Sorry, it's just on that particular bit. So yesterday I was at the UK Health Security Agency conference in Manchester, and indeed much emphasis was put upon the challenge of continuing falling vaccination rates. It's being seen across our populations as well as across our staff, and indeed it also links back to the challenges that we're going to face with the changes within NHS England, because teams delivering vaccination are potentially part of some of the challenge that's faced. So I managed to get time yesterday with our colleagues across the Northwest and linked in with Ian as well, that we're going to come together across the Northwest to see what's the best way of working to deliver the very best services there for our patients. There's some interesting insights that are coming out nationally as well, and we will feed those into this oversight group to make sure that we restructure to deliver the very best services for our population and our staff. Thanks.
That's really helpful. And I guess I'll express my anxiety, which is about pace, because we will soon be in that critical period, won't we? So thanks for that. And we'll hear in due course at the board what the action plan is likely to be. Right. We're going to call to the next. There's we've approved the continuation. There's some requests that have come from the board and some updates. So we'll see those in the action log and reporting in due course. If we can go to our next item, which is Chris, Director of Nursing and Care Report.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So I want to highlight a number of aspects within the report this month. The board may be aware of the NHS England's newborn hearing screening programme, where they completed analysis of data for every baby born within a certain timescale. And it identified 4 trusts covering 5 services nationally that reported the significantly fewer cases of permanent childhood hearing impairment than expected. And this resulted in thorough investigations of the services identified. And as a response to the findings, there were some national recommendations, and they were issued to all ICBs within the country to assess compliance with the established standards and also best practice. Following that stage 1 desk review of the data by NHSE, each service was provided with an assurance level, and within the ICB has 7 sites that will have a review, so there'll be a meeting, a quality visit held with commissioning leads and also a subject matter expert which has been identified by NHS England. We've had the first of those visits take place in early this month, which was at Wirral University Teaching Hospitals. We're awaiting the outcomes of that report, and the rest of the organisations will take place, as I say, within the first quarter of the next financial year. Then the areas for any improvement will be then monitored following these visits. We'll have an improvement plan, and they will be presented and regularly updated at any of our local quality contract meetings. The board will be aware, I've brought this previously in one of my reports, around the partnerships for inclusion of neurodiversity in schools, or shortly named as PINS, which is a project that's been funded by the Department of Education, and it's been managed through NHS England. We currently have 37 primary schools across 7 local authority areas involved in the project, and it's been supporting schools to develop their capacity to meet neurodiverse needs within mainstream primary schools and to improve attendance. The project is going really well. The Department for Education is looking to extend this moving forward in 25-26. I think one of the areas I'd like to focus is the working with our local parent carer forum, their support in helping us make sure that this happens within our primary schools, and we're looking at early indications of the work that's any indications that come out for any reported differences. But from the SEND coordinators, it's working really well within the ICB. And the last part that I wanted to raise, at the last board meeting, we had a discussion around the system priorities for safety. Since the last board meeting, we've held a number of focus groups with our partners, our stakeholders. We've worked with our patient safety partners across our provider trusts, from both acute, specialist, within and community, and that looked at the individual providers where they've considered their priorities for their patient safety and investigation using the PSERV framework. So what we've done now is our Quality and Performance Committee had a focus workshop at the last meeting, and we are pulling together our system priorities that will link into the patient safety priorities within our organisations. We're also planning that we'll hold a safety summit with potential support from AQUA, so it'll be based around the AQUA framework. And then a finally proposed safety priorities for the system will be brought to the board in May for approval. And those are the points that I want to highlight, Chair. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thanks, Chris. Any questions or comments? Tony?
Thanks, Roger. Thanks, Chris. It's a reference to the patient safety system priorities development that you've highlighted in the report. And you comment that the development of system-wide safety priorities offers a perspective wider than individual organisations. I think it's a very important point, and it's one that AQUA, the Advancing Quality Alliance, term the model of care, and a quick quote from them: developing relationships across whole pathways of care is essential. Current models of care are pushing people towards an acute model of care that potentially impacts on safety in the whole system. New models of care using resources across the whole system are needed, and ICBs are ideally placed to affect the change. This, I think, is the core of these developments. You're quite right to point out that patient safety incident response framework strategies developed in individual trusts. What the ICB is responsible for is actually developing these pathways and looking to improve whole models of care for the benefits of patients and the public. So I think that's the core of the direction we're going in, and fully support that approach. Thank you.
Thanks, Tony. Trish?
Thank you, Chair. My question relates back to the Paediatric Audiology Services National Review. And the question, Chair, is how will assurance be maintained and improvements sustained across the audiology service after the current review concludes?
Thanks, Trish. Chris?
Thanks, Trish. So once all the quality visits have taken place and we've got the recommendations, and there'll be a detailed improvement action plan that each organisation will have to follow to assure that we're establishing the national standards and the best practice. We'll monitor that improvement plan with each of the organisations through our regular quality performance meetings, and I can bring that back to future boards of the development of that.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Okay. Thank you. But no further comments. This report was here for noting. I'm going to go into the finance report, Mark.
Thanks, Chair. Apologies for my voice. I've been clearly speaking to too many directors of finance this week on the planning round, which I'll talk to you about later, but bear with me. Yes, so this report provides an update on the month 10, or the January position for the 24-25 financial year. Shows lots of information regarding performance against our financial plan and some other key metrics of performance, including efficiency, productivity and workforce. As at the 31st of January, the ICS was reporting a year-to-date deficit of 109.7 million against a planned deficit of 62.4, therefore resulting in an adverse variance of around 47.3 million pounds. Again, to be clear, this consists of both the ICB and the wider NHS provider positions, and both of those are included in and set out in Table 1 on Section 2.6, and indeed as per the run rate chart in Section 2.7. Regards to the outturn position as at month 10, which again you can see in Table 1, that showed a risk-adjusted position for the year of a 72.6 million variance against the plan of 150 for the year, so resulting in a 223.4 million deficit. And again, there's much more detail within the pack, which I'll return to shortly. As referenced earlier in this, a number of meetings that we've had this year, the variance continues to be driven by a number of key factors and pressures, both across the ICB position and indeed across the providers, which I'll touch on now. The ICB position continues to be driven by three key factors. Broadly across continuing healthcare, which in the year-to-date position is around £23 million, mental health packages of care, which are around £20 million, and prescribing performance, which is around £16 million, and continue to drive actions within the ICB and amongst partners to try and improve those positions. You'll know that the ICB has its own recovery programme, which continues to deliver actions in order to support the risk-adjusted position as included in the report. With regards to the provider positions, again, largely consistent with previous reports. Those are driven by a number of in-year factors around costs of industrial action, pay award cost pressures, non-delivery of efficiency savings, and a number of other organisational specifics which are set out in section 3.1 within the report. The report includes a lot more information on other areas, as again we've previously touched upon, so agency spend, workforce, cost improvement delivery, and in particular around cash, which I think is a feature of our financial framework, which we'll need to keep a really close eye on, not only for next year, but indeed into future periods, and again is a key area of monitoring that we need to do going forwards. Section 3.38 provides a risk-adjusted position for 24/5. Notwithstanding this report is obviously a little bit out of date now, so I will at this point refer you to the month 11 report that was reported to the Finance Committee, so that's on page 435 of the pack. So that meeting was just over a week ago now, where we updated on the month 11 performance position, so I'm going to jump to that slightly. Pleased to say that we did see an improvement in the month 11 and indeed the month 11 forecast outturn position, and I'd like to just draw your attention to that page where we are reporting now a 195.9 million deficit compared to the 223 that's included in your report. That is down to a couple of factors, continued improvements in run rates on both the ICB and indeed on the provider positions, but also some additional resources that we received from NHS England during the period, which have allowed us to improve that position. So that now takes us to under a 200 million position, so that's 195.9, so resulting in a 45.9 million variance against the original plan of 150. So, you know, good work continues to try and improve the financial performance for the system and for the ICB in particular. We'll continue to progress the remaining actions in month 12 in order to land that position in accordance with NHS England's conversations that we're having at the moment. And obviously, we've got a few more weeks left until we have to conclude our year-end requirements around our annual report, our annual accounts, and indeed the audit programme that we'll then embark on during April and May, ahead of the audit sign-off, hopefully in June. So I will pause there, Chair, if that's okay. Hopefully that's will come from the board in terms of an update. Yeah, I'll pause there. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark. Any questions or comments? I've got Steve, then Mike.
Let me raise this issue because there was a time of change with NHS, and just wonder whether or not we can start to look at the way we look at our whole of our budget management and strategic budget setting. We start every year with a budget deficit. This is an anathema to myself, and I've worked in the private and the public sector. Why we start with a deficit? 150 million pounds, it's only a small percentage of £6 billion in an organisation. But why do we start with a deficit every year? Because we always think these numbers, I'm always have to think we're quite hard about thinking back to the 150 million deficit. Why not start in balance? Why not say to the providers in the system, take your efficiencies out before you start, and to see where we're at in more real terms? Is it not possible to do that? To have some tough conversation with providers and others about making budget efficiencies before we agreed a budget perhaps for 26, 27 onwards.
So there's two elements to your question, isn't it, Steve, about how we account, and secondly those tough questions. Mark,
I just don't think it drives forward issues around effectiveness and efficiency and productivity. That's the way we agree in our budgets at the moment. But it's a national issue, I understand.
Okay. Well, just very quickly on the national issue and then talk about the cost improvement performance management arrangements.
Thanks, Chair. Yep, Steve, I really agree with the points made. I suppose, you know, we work together as a system. I think we've made probably this point previously, that whilst the ICB is its own system, an ecosystem in that sense, we are part of a wider NHS family, and as you know, there are national resources and pots of money that you know are used to offset the national position against local position. So that is one thing that we do continue to work closely on. I mean, I completely take your point about why did we start the year, and you know every year we lurch from deficit to deficit. I think that's the key point. I suppose just to stress, and again you'll hear it later today in terms of the planning position. We do need to do more on medium longer term plans as a system. We need to identify opportunities to take cost out of our system. So you know we are a relatively large system at in and around £7 to £8 billion that we spend locally. We are working really hard together as a community to identify those opportunities. Again, you'll hear more about that later. Sort of different phrases that are being used, difficult decisions, unpalatable options, are where we are really in terms of doing that, and then looking back to information that we have and need to do more with around productivity, opportunities about the benchmarking information on costs, both clinical and indeed corporate costs, and again some of that has been referenced in terms of the NHS England changes. But really that development of that 3 to 5 year, I suppose, long-term plan, looking at the needs of our population, looking at the outcomes that we wish to achieve, eradicating, I suppose, duplication and poor value within our system. How do we incentivise and move towards that is definitely the work that we need to do. And again, we've spoken past in this meeting and other meetings about developing that medium to long-term plan, and that's certainly my focus for the next quarter, is to do that not only for the ICB but indeed working in and across the system. I think last point I'd make, and again we'll talk about it later, is we know there is further grip and control that's needed on a number of our parts of our system. So dare I say, movement away from non-recurrent delivery to recurrent delivery. We know that's a strong feature of our system. How do we incentivise the right types of behaviours to move us forwards? Again, dare I say it, move to a more preventative-based system rather than reactive, which I think is where a number of our costs currently are in the urgent care landscape, are as a result of changes that we want to make to move that into a preventive space. So lots to do, Steve, but completely agree with the points that you've made.
Okay. Mike?
It's a similar point to Steve's actually, because the trajectory shape is quite interesting in that it deteriorates for quite a while and then there's an upturn at the end, and I wonder if we've got a handle on whether that improvement is due to genuine cost reduction measures taking place in the organisations, or whether it's the release of reserves to improve the position at the year end. Just building on Steve's point, the financial challenge didn't emerge on month one, did it, in April? So organisation, if it's a genuine cost reduction, I don't understand why it's month 9, 10, 11, 12, where the Trust should have anticipated this and been tackling these challenges head on much earlier in the year. Or is it just the release of reserves that we're looking at?
So I think it's probably a combination of things, Mike, as you'll know. What I suppose I would say is that the planning round for last year was difficult and challenging. We'll all know that. The elections, the late planning guidance, there are a number of features of the 24-5 years, which I hope we aren't repeating this year, because we know, as of today, we know what needs to happen from the 1st of April, and that does feel and look a bit different. I think the summer months, before I started this role, so I'm speaking a little bit from the outside in here, we know that there were interventions placed on lots of systems, and we had some of that as well. The I&I regime, the bringing in of external support, I think identified that there were opportunities to have more grip and control on features that we've already talked about. So in particular pay and workforce, and again we put some measures in place during the late summer, early autumn, which I think we need to do more of that into the new year. So again, from day one of month one, what are we expecting to happen? Have we got a grip on that? We need a different system design around that, and again we're talking about that at the moment amongst the leadership, both finance and indeed the wider corporate. I think there is an element of planning, which again speaks to the previous point around lurching almost from month to month and year to year. We need to do a better longer term sort of vision of that, and really plot the sort of the end point and working backwards from that in a way perhaps that the system doesn't do. I suppose it's not an excuse, but what I would also maybe argue is we are a large complex system, like others, but we do have that as a feature. So bringing together the 16 providers, the 9 places, the different local authority issues that we have. So again, that's part of our construct that we need to design our governance around, but equally does make those conversations a little bit different perhaps to some other systems across the country. But again, we're looking to work on that during the first quarter to make sure we get that grip and control that you're alluding to.
Do we know if there's a component of reserves being released into that position at the end of the financial year? Do we know?
So the movement in month 12 was due to a number of specific transactions or specific issues. So again, I think we've spoken about this, Mike, apologies, I know this is your first meeting, so some of those maybe not as known to you. So there are some specific issues that were and are going to be transacted in month 12 that bring about that hockey stick movement. Pleased to say that they are all on track. So a couple of those are in our Liverpool system. There were a number of transactions that were due to happen in that period. We're looking to, again, eradicate that movement, so we're all clear on what happens from time to time. So I don't think it's about release of reserves in that way. I think it was the way that certain transactions needed to happen at certain points in the year that were subject to national and or other local agreements that needed to happen. I'm not sure anyone has reserves in the same way as perhaps 5 or 10 years ago, in that respect, but I think profiling we can certainly do more on, and that, indeed that's part of our conversations at the moment with the Trust for 25-6 planning.
Thanks. Graham?
The way the NHS was funded through COVID, some might say was the best thing that happened to the NHS, but others might say it was the worst thing that happens to the NHS. And what has been happening over the last 2 or 3 years is the system is being weaned off how we were treated during COVID in an attempt to move us back to some more rigorous financial discipline that has been present throughout the NHS since the NHS existed. So I think we need to hold on to a couple of key thoughts here. So one, the ICB will have balanced its budget, and it will have delivered a small surplus this year, and it's really important that we remember that in terms of our statutory financial duty. Now, alongside those statutory financial duties that we hold, we were given a wider collaborative duty, and that was to get the system to deliver a control total. And it is the area in which the system has not delivered to a control total that we continue to dwell and we continue to spend so much of our time. Now, there's always an issue when you have a system that's rules are not particularly clear, or where you have leverage that sits at different points. So I think it's really important to say our attempt to get a system control total agreed, and where this deficit falls under our remits of our responsibility to get the system to collaborate and work together. We do not hold the statutory powers and the regulatory powers over our NHS trusts, and I think we should be particularly mindful of that fact. Now, those powers are being exercised, but sometimes they're being exercised in a way that doesn't always tackle the most difficult of problems. And I do think it's worth you just disclosing to the board, Mark, what happens to an organisation that runs out of cash and the process that goes through, please.
Yeah, so unfortunately that's a real live issue. We've got one trust and a few not far behind who are in a process of prioritising what they spend their residual cash on during March, and indeed that often means that they are unable to pay some of their creditors in that sense. So there is a very strict cash regime in terms of what organisations can draw down based on their assigned income. They have to make difficult choices then about paying back sort of government debt, if you like, in the form of PDC, dare I say HMRC in terms of tax, national insurance type contributions, and I suppose fundamentally the last of those is payment to staff and other local suppliers. We are experiencing that real challenge at the moment with, as I say, a couple of our trusts particularly. Should the deficits continue in the way that they are, that regime that Graham has alluded to will become very much more in the sort of the near line of sight than perhaps it has been in the last few years. So cash is a crucial measure. Certainly back to my sort of accountancy days of cash is king, it's very much, you know, it does point to where the problems are in our system. And we've got to get a better understanding of A, the national expectation around that, but B, what does that mean for us locally, and how do we work together as a system to mitigate that as far as possible. But to your point, Graham, yeah, it will mean that some payments may not be met in the very near future. That obviously doesn't particularly bode well for those organisations.
I think the important point is the consequences of this are real, and they are just felt in ways that we do not directly see. And actually, as soon as we get on top of the overall running cost of this system, the better. So, Steve, keep asking those questions.
Thanks, Mark. Graham, any other questions on this? Anthony? Like you? You know, within the situation that Graham and Mark have outlined, specifically about our statutory responsibilities and what our regulatory powers aren't, we still work in a system which in effect holds us to account for the delivery of the financial outturn of the system. So within that context, I think it would be useful, Mark, for the board to understand reasonably quickly, so outside of the meetings through through a circulation, what your assessment. So let me just stop. The delivery of finances is not by the finance director. We all know that, don't we? And we can see in our board report here today a series of indicators that help us understand why the system is under financial pressure. Everything from urgent care, infections, you know, the demand that's at the door, and we can see some efficiency measures in there that we could improve on. So I'm really looking at the whole exec team here. We need to understand how ready our trusts are, and then at system level are for 25-26. How real are their recurrent CIP plans? How real are their demand management plans at place level that will help us get through 25-26 in a better way? So it's a challenge. I'll ask Mark to lead it, but from an exec perspective, how do you help the board understand what that level of variability is across the system, and where should we pay time and attention over this next 3 months to enable us to get us into the best possible place, as well as supporting the system? Is that reasonably clear? Is that something the board would support in terms of wanting to understand? And obviously, Erica, through the finance committee, I think there's clearly there's a key role there. Thank you for that. Should we move on to the performance report?
Thank you, Chair. Everybody's used to the style of this report now. It shows the overall view of our delivery against the objectives that we have set ourselves out as part of the annual planning round. It provides the breakdown across provider and place, and at section 5 details any exceptions that are arriving from that report. But I think just talking to your latter comments there, Chair, and I think picking up on what I think is really useful is the context for which some of this is being delivered in. It is the time where we're looking towards landing of this year's planning round and finalising the plans for next year, and we often take a period of reflection to look at the demands that we've seen during that period. And just fresh in my mind from the latest position that we've got, if we look at the level of activity that's taking place within our hospitals at the moment around planned care, be that inpatient day case or outpatients, that is 7.9% up on the previous year. Our diagnostic activity levels across trusts and communities is now 9% up on the previous year. And if we look at GP appointments and wider primary care provision, we see that activity running 3% higher than the previous year, and a similar figure both in terms of paediatric and mental health touch points as we record. So a really busy year in the context of what we're trying to achieve in terms of continual improvement. If we look to urgent care, we actually see a reduction in people attending our A&E and walk-in centres. That is down by 4% over the course of this year, and we see that as a strong correlation between improved access within primary care, meaning that those patients can go to a more appropriate setting pertinent to their clinical needs rather than an A&E unit. But what we also see within that urgent care setting is that the volumes of patients that are coming through A&E and being admitted into some form of bedded care and through into social care has remained unchanged. In fact, demand in certain pathways, particularly in social care, has increased through that period. So when we look at our performance in the context of all that, I think it's encouraging to see, particularly in the sense of urgent and emergency care. If we look back at that really challenged period that we know we experience around winter every year, you can clearly see from the paper itself that we have seen that level of bounce back from that position that we saw in January. We're now, our A&E 4-hour performance measure is 5% up on the same period last year. And I think as we head into what has been a particular focus during March in terms of a recovery period, I suspect we will land 1% higher than where we are currently in terms of that. Ambulance category response times have improved. They are 5 minutes faster than they were this time last year. But those two measures are absolutely right and are absolutely appropriate, and is where the system is trying to manage the most acute risk within the system. But what we see from that point on is relatively a static position. The bed occupancy within the hospitals, the volumes of corridor care that patients are experiencing, the number of patients that are awaiting for exit into social care settings has remained pretty much unchecked throughout the whole of the year. Sorry, that's the wrong word, not unchecked, has remained unchanged during that period. And I think what it shows is that whilst there are extensive improvement plans at this point in time, they are keeping in line with that increased demand that we are seeing and not yet yielding the tangible improvement that we would expect. That has been the main discussion through the 25-26 planning round, and we're really looking as an ICB in how do we add some real strength into the delivery side of those plans that do exist across the 5 localities or indeed at scale. Some of that we discussed at a deep dive event during March with our Quality and Performance Committee, and I know it's touched on in the later paper. If I look to other parts of our delivery, and particularly elective, we can see a fall in the overall list size. It's about 15,000 smaller than it was at the start of this year. And in terms of our 65-week objective, I believe we'll have about 250 patients whose treatment will still be in excess of 65 weeks by the year end. In terms of cancer, I won't touch too much on that. I know John and John have got a really extensive performance, but a presentation to come. But you can clearly see from the paper itself some massive achievements in terms of cancer, which I would also say is reflected in some of the challenge around elective. But we'll have a further discussion when we come on to the planning round later in the day. So I'll hold there if it's okay, Chairman. Happy to pick up any points of interest or indeed other colleagues can pick up as the subject matter determines.
Thanks, Anthony. Any questions, comments? No? Hilary?
Thank you. Can I pick up on virtual wards? I still note we've got a national target for that, and well done. I mean, we've really ramped up over the last year in terms of utilisation, but there is variation amongst places. So I think my first question, are we at full capacity now in terms of what virtual ward places? I don't want to call them beds, or have we reduced that? So is that 90% of what, you know? Have we reduced capacity? Have we increased capacity over that year?
No, the capacity that we have at the moment, and we've increased the occupancy level to 80%, as you say, in aggregate, right, yeah, which is the national one, has been unchanged during the course of this year. Because part of the decision that we took at the start of this year was not to invest in any further capacity until we'd made best use of the ones that already existed. Now that we've attained that level, and after discussion with the collaborative, We are looking to invest in a further expansion from next year. You will see that as part of the wider discussion this afternoon around the planning round. But within that, very much understanding the variation in provider ability to deliver those higher levels of occupancy level, both at the exit point from hospitals, but more importantly, to avoid the entry point in.
Yeah, so that brings me on to my second comment, which is, I mean, the research virtual wards is not great, is it? There's very little, but there's something about the cost effectiveness of them. Is it good bang for our buck? Is it good value for money? But also the outcomes as well, particularly in terms of readmissions and our safety bundles. So there's something about us really having an eye on that. And also, as we're building neighbourhood care models as well, what is the alignment of the virtual ward facility to those, to our planning for that as well? So it's not a segmented service.
No, absolutely. We'll take that on board. Thank you.
Thanks. Ruth?
Unrelated question, but at the last board meeting, we were reflecting on the vaccination uptake rates and variation by trust. And the sickness absence data that we had for staff was actually up until September. So we weren't able to assess what impact the winter was having on our staff well-being. We now have data till the end of December. And remarkably, the Cheshire and Merseyside picture is the same figure since April right through to December. It's 5.6%. It doesn't change at the aggregate level, which is it's high, but it's completely consistent. So it made me look at the provider data that's there, and there's a huge variation between sickness absence in the different provider trusts. One is at 4%, and there's one at 7.8%. So my question is, what are we doing to understand the impact in different trusts, and what steps are being taken to look at this element of productivity? Because obviously staff well-being is absolutely crucial to maintaining services. I don't know if it's a question for you, Anthony, or whether it's for Mike.
Should we ask Mike to lead on that question?
Thank you. So I suppose the answer is that you're right, there is huge variation, and that's not unusual across a broad range of trusts. So if you look at Manchester, the Christie's has a really low, well-managed sickness figure. Other providers that are much higher. So we, as chief people officers, monitor it and look at it in terms of variation, and we look at local initiatives. So often it's what's behind it. So, and the two things are, we are seeing, you know what I'm going to say, but I think it's two things here. So one is clearly is mental health issues and stress-related issues. So we've had lots of initiatives like rugby league cares and things to try and do things locally, particularly in teams that are affected. This was an initiative particularly at theatre teams. And then there's very specific vocational areas. But a really good example being ambulance services, where they've seen, across the Northwest, they've seen musculoskeletal overtake mental health issues, because they've had so many ambulance people inside, cramped up in ambulances for very long periods, and they've done their back in effect. So we often look at it by the cause, and we have Northwest putting out a series of initiatives, and we have a series that's within Cheshire and Merseyside.
Okay, right, thanks for that. Perhaps if we could look to Trish, do you want to make a comment on that? Because you're running an organisation that's got a relatively high level of sickness absence. What work are you doing to help address that?
Thank you very much, Chair, and it's a clear focus for us in terms of, one, supporting people, helping them get back to work, and clearly understanding the data is really important, Chair, and why people, you know, what's the areas of focus. Certainly the relationship between anxiety and work-related stress and areas of musculoskeletal, really critical. Focusing the teams, both from an operational level, clinical level, right through the organisation, that this is a key productivity focus, not just in terms of safety, of course, but in terms of patient experience. So very much it's a whole trust approach to this, looking at a multifaceted approach, but also working on the culture of the organisation, making it the best place, best trust for people to work in. I think just recently talking with Liverpool University on a different approach in terms of teach and treat, and it's in its early stages, Chair, of thought process and possibilities, and that is working with the university on a different approach with trainees, so psychology students, physiotherapy students, dental students, etc., in terms of how we might consider as a system working with students to help our personnel, our staff get back to work, you know, really in the most safest and appropriate way. So we think this could be a game changer. It's in its very early discussions, Chair, but it's certainly one for us to consider as a whole system with universities.
Okay, thanks, Tricia. And I guess there'll be great practice happening in our organisations across the piece, and understanding how we're showing that great practice. And yes, I'm surprised. I was waiting for you, Anne, to say something.
Yeah, the variation thing. I mean, the only acute trust that looks like it's got massive variation is MWL, and that's because it employs all the junior doctors in the patch, and therefore, because junior doctors have quite low levels of sickness, it pulls the average down. If I was sitting around MWL's board table now, they wouldn't be using this figure at all. They take out the junior doctors, and when you take that out, it's about 5.6%. So there isn't really an anomaly. The only anomaly is Mid-Cheshire, but then Mid-Cheshire have got a massively high figure for community staff, so that doesn't make sense either. But if you look at the groupings, so the acute trusts are kind of pretty similar, the specialist trusts are pretty similar, and the community trusts are pretty similar, and it's just that there's that one distorting figure, so that's not 4%, so the range isn't from 4%, it's from the 5.1 that Mid-Cheshire have reported, although I say that looks a bit weird with their community staff being, they run all community services, so it'll be a fair cohort of staff. So whilst there'll be variation, it does seem to be a kind of system-wide problem that the whole of Cheshire and Merseyside have got quite high. The North West has, though. It's not just us. If you looked at GM and Lancashire South Cumbria, you'd see the same kind of pattern of higher than some other places in the country.
Okay, useful to have that analysis, and what we do need to see some hope, I guess, Mike, of action that actually improves staff satisfaction, which leads to improvements in sickness absence. Not for now, but I think we would return to it. I know we've got Trish and then Tony waiting.
Thank you, Chair. My question relates to the report highlights an above average healthcare acquired infections, particularly C. difficile and E. coli. Just relating back to obviously quality and safety, but productivity, length of stay, and of course the discussions around costs. The question is, what accountability measures are in place in terms of making sure we see these areas improve?
Thanks, Trish. Chris, do you want to lead on that?
Yeah, thanks, Trish. Healthcare associated infections will be one of our system safety priorities that we'll be bringing back to the board. And also we've established a healthcare associated infection system-wide group, which all organisations are contributing to. We feature this obviously within each of the quality contract meetings. It's a focus within our quality and system improvement. We have had a focus system quality group on healthcare associated infections. So, you know, we look at the data both nationally, regionally and locally, and each of the provider trusts who have got their safety priorities for the coming year features healthcare associated infections, so we're working quite closely with each of the trusts.
Thank you. Is it on this question, Rory?
Yeah. And there's a very clear set of links that go in with this. So in amongst healthcare acquired infection that really worries us is C. difficile, often associated with antibiotic prescribing. So we know that we still run with higher rates of antibiotics being prescribed across our communities, and then people coming into hospital, which is going to be part of driving this. So it's important that the board is aware that we understand there's a link, and we're looking to break that link. So the work is not just about what we do around hygiene and antimicrobial stewardship within the hospitals, but it's also getting the right messages out to the way we prescribe in primary care, in our care homes, and managing that burden of antimicrobial prescribing outside of the hospitals, true system working to look to tackle this challenge rather than look at it simply in silos and isolation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Tony.
Thanks, Chair. There's a question regarding the improvement shown in the A&E 4-hour waits. You're quite right to point out there's been a general improvement, but there are significant outliers which we've discussed previously at Quality and Performance, specifically East Cheshire, Mid Cheshire and Countess of Cheshire. So the question is if you could briefly explain the efforts being made in those trusts in particular to bring them back in line with high performance in this area, please.
Anthony, do you want to lead on that?
Yeah, I think it absolutely is a fair point. It's a position that we've seen for some time in terms of the those three Cheshire trusts having a particular lower rate of 4-hour performance than others. In terms of the Countess of Chester, we have run an all-system reset event during the period of February. That provided us a period of a week to understand exactly the issues that were at play, both in the community within the A&E itself, but also the flow through the hospital. And indeed, out the back of that has become quite a comprehensive plan, which I know, Tony, you saw in some detail at the Quality and Performance Committee, but for the benefit of all of the board members, that's been a really instrumental insight into understanding the achievements that can be realised within the four walls of the hospital, as well as those outside, really. And that's a really noticeable difference already, in the sense that in the month of February and into March, or certainly into March, in terms of 4-hour performance, we've seen a 10% increase in the 4-hour performance at the Countess of Chester, and those very long waits that were being experienced within the Countess in terms of patients spending in excess of 72 hours have been eliminated during that period. So some real progress, and it's instrumental in their plan going forward. The East Cheshire system, their performance has always had a historically a difficult period in terms of it is our smallest hospital, has the lowest number of beds, and has a limited number of senior decision makers on a 24-hour basis. But more recently, the challenges have arisen out of some real challenges in terms of accessing social care, and a different model that has been implemented around assessed to discharge. So there's a reaction to that, a change and discussion taking place to see whether or not that decision can be reversed and improved. But theirs is very much around the improvement within the four walls of the ED. There is no walk-in centre in the East Cheshire system, and that's something that is being explored as to whether or not streaming at the front door of ED into another part of the system may allow that to benefit.
Okay, so I guess that's work in progress, isn't it? That is what I'm hearing. Right, I'm going to move us on. We're running a bit out of time, but as we move to the place director's report, I was going to ask a question about smoking during pregnancy, and specifically the Halton figure, which is over 10%, 11%, which just seems extraordinarily high. Alison Carver, just try and weave something of that into your report. Or maybe not. Maybe that's a question elsewhere. Oh, is that Ian? Very quickly then, Ian.
I think what we might see actually is that the work being done by our treating tobacco dependency services in our maternity units and in our other acute trusts are paying dividends, and that rate is the lowest it's been. Obviously there's variance in places that we've got to focus on. One of the things is why we work with the local authority directors of public health is the launch of our End Smoking Here campaign, and that's something we lit up the Beacon Tower in Liverpool and other landmarks around that. We're doing case studies with pregnant smokers to understand how we can show how people can give up and be supported in that place, and there's a swap to stop scheme going on as well. So that's probably being done at scale, but recognise that it is different in different places, and we link in with the local authority DPHs on that.
Because Halton and St Helens really sticks out, doesn't it, in terms of rates. Right, let's move to the place director's report.
Thank you,
pretty
Chair.
comprehensive. Time.
Yep. Thank you very much, Chair. There is a comprehensive 37-page report in your pack. We are not going to talk to every item there. I think that highlights a lot of the collaborative work that goes along across all of our 9 places. What Alison and I wanted to do was just signpost some of that. So I'll kick us off with a couple of items that signpost some of the partnership work that we're doing across Cheshire and Warrington, and then hand over to Alison, and Alison will signpost some of the health inequalities work that's going on across the Liverpool City region. So I just wanted to start off with Cheshire West. So one of the things that they've been looking at, and they have to do this collaboratively, and I'll tease out why as I go along, is looking at developing a framework for a set of guidance that's called the Delegated Healthcare Tasks. And what that is a set of guidance that sets out how you can delegate tasks from a registered care worker, like a nurse, to paid care workers and personal assistants. Now, of course, if you're going to do that, you would want that to be safe and robust. And so you need to get your partners together to work out what that looks like. So that's your carers, your citizens, your patients, your commissioners and your providers. And what the guidance sets out and what Cheshire West are trying to achieve is making sure that is safe, that is robust, that it's person-centred, clinically appropriate, safe and effective. And so you can see the importance then of developing that together across your system. And that national framework and the principles within it have been developed by Skills for Care, Department of Health and Social Care, and partners such as the Care Quality Commission. So it'll be good to see how that develops over time. And I know as a Warrington place, we're really interested in the output and the outcomes related to that. And I think one of the good things about our report is I see things in there that I wasn't aware were going on in other places, and vice versa. And then the other thing I'd like to talk about Warrington, so the place that I know best. One of our key priorities is addressing poverty. So and raising the challenges across Warrington faced by residents. And one of the things that we have done recently is we've launched that work with a poverty conference, and we did that in February, and we kicked off with some resident stories which were really powerful and a real call to action. And also some of our VSFSE, our charities and our providers talking about what that feels like. So one of the examples we got from Citizens Advice is they are seeing more people accessing services like food banks that they've not seen before. And some of that are residents, but some of those are our staff as well. So one of the things we did as part of that is, as organisations, we made a pledge to look at how we come together to address some of those issues. And then one of the things that we did is we agreed to have a Poverty Truth Commission. So we will have that. We are setting that up in the spring, and that is where residents and community leaders will come together and co-produce, co-design what that Truth Commission looks like. So it is not a top-down done to, it's coming together to decide what that looks like. And I will hand over to you, Alison.
Thank you. I'll be quick, Chair. So I just wanted to highlight, it's really great to have the opportunity to highlight some of the health inequalities work being done locally across place partnerships. I think all of them are examples that demonstrate those strategic shifts to prevention, to empowering the communities, and from analogue to digital. There are examples of all of that in the report. So Halton, back to Ruth's earlier point, a really good example on their Core 20+5 programme about involving people and patients and the public in the borough to really lead some of that work as champion and support the delivery of local projects there. in Knowsley. We've broken some of this up with a photo for you. Really delighted about the work that's been driven by one of our local GPs, who's our health inequalities champion, on the Kirby cookbook developed by and with a local mums group in the borough. We've got Liverpool John Moores University helping to evaluate the impact of that, and clinicians from Aintree Hospital, liver specialists involved in that. Our next project there is around reading in the early years, and we were delighted to have the support of the Poet Laureate, the Children's Poet Laureate at our Health and Wellbeing Board, really championing that. So some really bottom-up innovative work being driven through sort of Health and Wellbeing Board, but delivered by and with NHS partners there as well. In Liverpool, wanted to highlight the digital stuff going on there, and a really innovative use of health apps, applications on phones to promote health and well-being. So really empowering digital literacy in the population there. Similar to one of the examples Carl's highlighted, St Helens have got an inequalities commission, and through that are using the very small amount of health inequalities money that we managed to earmark for place, really aligning that to the stories and the experiences coming out from the population about what's driving health inequalities there. Sefton, for the ICB, this was our team of the quarter, the hydration in care homes project, really improving the quality of care in care homes, and by that reducing admissions to hospital. There's an opportunity to broaden that out across wider areas should we manage to fund that as an organisation. And then finally, in Wirral, a really great example of work being led by the voluntary sector, One Wirral CIC, supporting people through their cancer diagnosis pathway, supported there and funded by Macmillan. So they were the ones I wanted to highlight from Liverpool City region. I think, Chair, it'd be really useful at some point to pause how we do this report into the next financial year, because it's a lot of effort to produce, it's a long report, and as we need to reduce some of the and become more effective and efficient as an organisation, I would be really grateful how we work with you as a board to hone this down for next year. But thank you.
Thanks, Carl and Alison. And Alison, that last question of the board is absolutely spot on. You can see the amount of work that's going on, and there's some real fantastic work going on in our places, and it's important for the board to understand that. But is this the best method for doing that? I'm not convinced it is. But we'll look to the the place directors and the execs to work out what is the best. What should the board see, and how can the board see in other ways the excellent work that's going on? And also, we must see a much stronger link between those activities and the population health metrics and the other metrics that we know we need to shift. So good prompt. Let me just. Are there any critical questions on this pretty comprehensive report? Erica?
There wasn't a question, it's just a comment, Alison. That's exactly, you've answered my question, because you read it and it's absolutely fantastic, isn't it? All the places are doing some absolutely brilliant things, but you stand back from it and think, well, what are the themes there? What are the dials that we've moved? So really welcome it, but I do think it's fantastic. But it's a lot. I appreciate it's a lot of work as well. But somehow in my head, put it in those themes and how have we moved the dials. Thank you.
Thanks, Erica. Okay, I'm going to move us on. Yep, is that okay? There was somebody waving. Hello.
Can I just comment on safeguarding?
Very quickly.
Sefton have made a comment here that they don't have the resources to support the ongoing needs of the population of Southport post-incident. And I just want to ask for assurance from Sefton that in their next report they give us an assurance that they've worked through what's needed and they have got enough locally commissioned services to meet the ongoing needs of that population.
Absolutely.
And it's because they raised it here that I want to request that assurance. Thank you.
We will hear that.
Yeah, my comment, thank you for the report. I do think it's really valuable, but I do echo your comments there. Mine came to me when I was reading the Primary Care Network piece, and I think it's more a flag of how we manage as we go to the neighbourhood work that we need to. So if you look at that, there's some really good stuff in it, but it's very general practice specific. It's not primary care. And I think a lot of that is driven by the continuation of the previous organisation, the CCG focus on general practice, and then the other disciplines of primary care being contracted and held differently. And I think my personal reflection is we've got very good place linkages with the representative bodies. We've not with the individual contractors. We just haven't got that there. And why that's important, and that's probably not specific to PCNs, the commissioning activity broadly follows that pattern. So we've got locally enhanced services commissioned at incredibly different rates between the different provider groups. And that effectively means as an ICB we're building and strengthening some providers differently to others. So I think there is something as we move into that neighbourhood model of how do we get to a place where our places are driving innovation that then we can flag up to national teams to say, look at what we've done here, we've either proved it, disproved it, fast failed it, but if we don't get that linkage right, it'll never happen at the level we need it to.
It's a great point, Adam, and it's a point that we've heard time to again and Claire through your work. As we evolve towards neighbourhoods, we have to see an answer to that question, don't we? So, really important point. So I'm gonna move us on if that's okay. And it's really the two Johns, I think it is. Firstly, apologies for keeping you waiting, but secondly, thank you for coming here today. Do you want to quickly introduce yourselves and?
How to use the microphone. Yes, I'm John Hayes. I'm the Managing Director of the Cheshire and Merseyside Cancer Alliance.
And I'm John McCabe. I'm the Medical Director of the Cheshire and Merseyside Cancer Alliance.
Chair, just to momentarily introduce this a report coming under my name. Delighted to see colleagues from the Cancer Alliance, one of the jewels in the crown of us as a system, something of which we're proud, and couldn't be closer to my heart, having spent 12 years as a cancer surgeon within our system. It's something that we're doing well, and I'm looking forward both to the progress made and the discussion that will follow. Thank you both very much for coming today.
Thank you, Rowan. Thank you, Chair. I'll rattle through a few slides that just summarise the report that was in the pack, and then John and I will be very happy to take questions if we've got time. So, just very briefly, the Cheshire and Merseyside Cancer Alliance oversees improvements in cancer services for the population of Cheshire and Merseyside on behalf of the ICB and other system partners. We are an alliance, so we bring partners together. We work with patients, commissioners, providers, research institutes, voluntary sector, charities, anybody who has got an interest in driving forward improvements in cancer outcomes for our population. We're hosted by Clatterbridge Cancer Centre on behalf of the system, and we are funded through the National Cancer Programme, assisting in NHS England. 4 key responsibilities. Firstly, leading the local delivery of the National Cancer Strategy, so a real focus on delivering the objectives of the long-term plan, particularly around early diagnosis of cancer. Secondly, and really importantly, reducing unwarranted variation in cancer care and access to cancer care, and opportunities to live healthy lifestyles, not to need to access cancer care. So a real focus on inequalities. Thirdly, to improve performance against national standards, and fourthly, supporting innovation and looking to that kind of longer term view around sustainability of good, robust, high quality services. I think we've got quite a lot to be proud about within Cheshire and Merseyside in terms of some of the improvements that we have seen in outcomes over recent years. The graph that you can see on screen there is our early diagnosis of cancer rates. Cheshire and Merseyside, as in common with many kind of northern post-industrial areas, saw relatively poor outcomes of cancer, early diagnosis being one that was, for Cheshire and Merseyside, we were basically ranked second from the bottom in terms of all the regions in England back in 2018. We have now closed that gap and have accelerated above the national average and are now amongst the best in terms of our rates. Survival is a similar picture. On the screen there, you've got 1 year cancer survival The dotted line is the England average, the blue line at the top is Cheshire and Merseyside, and the other two lines that are kind of on top of each other are the other two systems in the northwest. And you can see that for 1 year cancer survival, we have had cancer survival rates higher than the national average for a few years now. Pleasingly, this graph now is the 5-year cancer survival rates. And for the first time, Cheshire and Merseyside is now above the national average for long-term cancer survival. That is, I think that's a really significant milestone, and so many people have contributed to that in all different settings. So that's good news. However, we do have variation. We do still have inequalities. Here is the 1 year survival by former CCG area, because it relates to slightly older data. That's the nature of public health data. It does tend to have a bit of a time lag, particularly when you're looking at cancer survival. And you can see that although we've got several CCG areas which are significantly above the national average, we do still have some areas that are lower in terms of these data. I think it's important to recognise that the improvements that we have seen in early diagnosis rates have been greater in those neighbourhoods with the highest levels of deprivation. So I am hoping, we are both hoping, that in the next iteration of these survival data, we will see some of that imbalance reducing. Okay. Cancer waiting times is another proxy indicator, if you like, of good quality outcomes. Cheshire and Merseyside, 62-day cancer waiting time, so that's the time from an urgent cancer referral through to first definitive treatment. The Cheshire and Merseyside waiting times have been better by some considerable margin than the England average throughout the whole of this last year and previously as well. We are still, however, not at the constitutional standard of 85%, so we've still got work to do, but comparatively, treatment times are relatively good in Cheshire and Merseyside, but not where we want them to be. We are on track to meet the interim target for the 28-day faster diagnosis standard by March as well. And we're already achieving, in terms of the 62-day standard, we're achieving the ambition that has been set for actually a year hence. Early diagnosis positive, survival getting more positive, waiting times relatively good. However, it's still true to say that you have a higher chance of getting cancer in the first place in Cheshire and Merseyside than in many other parts of the country. So our incident rates, crude incidence rates, in terms of number of new cancers per 100,000 population, is approximately 10% higher in Cheshire and Merseyside than the England average, and that's been a fairly consistent picture over the course of the last decade. So actually, that is something that really warrants increased focus, in our opinion. Patient experience, obviously, is hugely important. We benefit in Cheshire and Merseyside from a really strong and proactive group of patient representatives that help and guide all the work that we do. Stacey is one of our patient storytellers who introduced the meeting with her experience around waiting for scan results. It's really important that we listen to a diverse range of voices to help inform the design and delivery of future services. Pleasingly, in the National Cancer Patient Experience Survey, Cheshire and Merseyside has ranked the highest in terms of overall satisfaction of care. So patients in Cheshire and Merseyside rank their care overall 9.01% out of 10 in this the most recent year. So that's really good news. But we still know, and Stacey's a case in point, there is further work to be done to really properly improve patient experience as well as patient outcomes. Okay. I wanted briefly to mention patient safety, particularly in the light of the Ombudsman statement last week that highlighted delays and errors in reporting imaging scans. I thought it was quite pertinent given the patient story we heard at the beginning of the meeting. So just a little bit of an update in terms of what we are doing as a Cancer Alliance and a wider system on that. So the Alliance has been running a process over the last 18 months or so whereby we take anonymised safety incident reports from across Cheshire and Merseyside that relate to cancer patients, and we work with the ICB's patient safety team on this to review all of those, look at the themes, draw out the learning, and then share that learning back out to the system, so that something that happens in the north of our geography that might otherwise not get shared with other parts of the system does get shared. So we are improving that kind of learning cycle. Likewise, under the oversight of the Cheshire and Merseyside Diagnostic Programme within the Provider Collaborative, all trusts have regular radiology event and learning meetings, and improvements to the radiology systems, so the PAC systems, and moving to a cloud-based system will improve that ability to peer review, and a new system called RadAlert will enhance the ability to track critical findings from scan results and make sure that they aren't missed. And we're also embracing AI technology to further improve the accurate reading and communication of scans. So final slide before we move into questions, just a little bit of a look ahead to the year. We know that we're going to get a new 10-year plan for health in the relatively near future. We also know that that's going to be followed up with a dedicated new cancer strategy sometime in the latter part of this year. That will obviously be really important for us to see and make sure that we are in a position to be able to drive that forward for our local community. But we anticipate that we will be continuing throughout the whole of this year and beyond to focus on improving early diagnosis and survival rates. We've made a great start, but we want to go a heck of a lot further. We want to focus on closing that incidence gap, so we do need to do more in terms of the Cancer Alliance's involvement in prevention. We want to continue to work with our patients and carers and our communities to improve outcomes and patient experience and reduce inequalities. And of course, we still want to go further and faster on improving cancer waiting times and delivering greater productivity. I hope that's a good summary of the paper, and happy to take questions with John.
Thank you, John. Some great results there. Let me see some questions and comments. Ruth? Ian?
John, well, both Johns, really good to see fantastic progress on tackling one of the major causes of health concerns in our community. I suppose, as always, we want to do more and do better. It's great to see that you're really tackling some of the inequalities and getting that early diagnosis, which I think has been a focus for quite a long time now. Couple of questions, slightly different. One, you mentioned AI in helping to read scans. I was also learning only just recently about AI being used to diagnose cancers without the clinician. There was sufficient confidence. This was in skin cancer. So I guess my challenge is there more that we could do to really expedite where there's known evidence-based interventions that are really innovative that would really rapidly deal with that gap between concern and being told it's okay, or yes, there's something that needs following up. And that's what this innovation was beginning to show. So that's sort of how much more can we do with innovation. The second question is a much more strategic commissioning question. You've outlined 5 areas there you want to improve. As a strategic commissioner, my question is, what are we spending on cancer services now? What's the projected need for cancer services in the future? And how much, what's it going to take to deliver the sort of ambitions that you've got here? Have you got an overview of that programme budget approach that we need to look at in terms of our strategic plans? So 2 very different questions.
Okay. Shall I start and
yeah,
you chip in? So within the Cancer Alliance, we do have an innovation programme, and we are partnered with the Health Innovation Network Northwest Coast in delivering that. But there are a huge number of other partners in the innovation field. John, I'm sure, will have a view on AI technology. My personal view on AI technology is that it definitely has a place, a role to play, but I think it's important that we are careful with the timing in terms of we don't want to be late in adopting new innovative technology, but equally there is a risk in adopting it too early. Is my view. In terms of strategic commissioning, I think it's a really good question and a really hard question to answer, to be absolutely honest, Ruth, partly because there are so many different parts of the system that contribute to cancer care. So it's very, very difficult to tease out spend just on cancer care because it's multidisciplinary and everything. I guess what I would say is that in terms of improving our outcomes, yes, hospital-based diagnostics and treatments are really, really important, but actually there's a huge amount of work that we are doing and can do more out in communities at relatively inexpensive projects as well, in terms of changing the understanding within communities around the signs and symptoms of cancer, increasing uptake into screening programs, all of those things that are actually really, really important in terms of early diagnosis and prevention as well, take relatively little money. But do I have a full oversight of where all the money is in terms of cancer spend? I'm afraid I don't.
Perhaps Mark does.
Thank you, John. John, rather than go to that innovation question, just because of time, there's a really important question, both nationally as well as locally, about how do we assess innovations like AI applied to dermatology cases, and how do we adopt them and how do we fund them? I think that's a big national question that we need to come back to. And programme budget, you can see the future direction where we're going to go on this.
Yeah.
I've got Ian next.
Thank you. Conscious of time, but it was more about the bullet points around how do you reduce the demand into the service and the incidents. And as well as we highlighted before, smoking, there's still 1 in 10 of our population in Cheshire and Merseyside smoking, but that ranges from Cheshire East, which is about 7%, to Halton, which is about 14%, which links into the smoking at time and delivery variants too. Which is why we're coming together to help prevent that demand, and it's really important we do that because it still contributes to 3,500 deaths, 20,000 emissions. It's just to highlight to the board the synergies between the great work going on by the Cancer Alliance and what we do with partners around population health, the reducing the harms of alcohol and the obesity agenda, all contributing to that. So, and also to flag, there is a risk with regards to the changes going on and the delegations due to the ICB around screening and immunisation. So we will work together on that, and just to highlight that risk to the board, really.
Thanks, Ed, and thanks for highlighting that, because there's some real international exemplar work there going on, so well done to you all on that. I know I'm rushing, but any final questions? John, thank you for coming here. It's really important to have this time here for you. I know it feels rushed, but yeah, your paper was pretty comprehensive and the board was able to understand it, I thought, because it was really, really well written. And thanks to you and your team for what you're achieving to date, and we'll look forward to hearing from you Is it annually you come here?
At your beck and call.
Well, we'll work out the best route for you. Thank you. Thank you again.
Thank you.
James, Tim, are you happy to come up? Just quickly introduce yourselves, James, and we've got slides. Okay.
Is that working? Yeah. Right. Hello everybody, I'm James Sumner. I'm the Chief Executive at University Hospitals Liverpool and from Tuesday at Liverpool Heart and Chest Hospital.
Morning everybody, Tim Gold, Group Chief Transformation Officer for University Hospitals of Liverpool.
Okay, over to you, Tim.
Okay, we've got a presentation. You've obviously seen the paper. I don't know how much you want us to cover, Chair, in terms of time. Happy to take you through this briefly, or
briefly, please.
Yeah, sure. Okay. You'll be aware of obviously the case for change. You've got it in the packs today. Just a brief introduction to what the partnership is about. So you'll be aware the 5 organisations: Liverpool Heart and Chest, Clatterbridge, Walton, what was Luft, and Liverpool Women's Hospital coming together. We've made significant progress in the last 9 months on this. As you know, we've got a clear roadmap, which is in the pack, of when organisations will formally join that structure. So Luft and Liverpool Women's have already done that. As I say, Heart and Chest, I start as the accountable officer on Tuesday, and we're working then on a timeline for them to come into that same arrangement, followed by the Walton Centre and Clatterbridge throughout that timeline or earlier. Where we are at the moment is the case for change effectively, as it says, is not a strategy or an implementation plan. Really, it's just to state why this is an important thing to do. It highlights a number of the opportunities in detail. So to set the scene, you know demand is rising, you know our population is one of the most deprived. The Luft hospital population is the most deprived in-hospital population in the country. And that demonstrates our inability perhaps to provide a healthcare system that people can navigate well. We know within the City of Liverpool, where we've got a reading age of 8, we've probably got one of the most complex NHS landscapes in terms of service provision with so many providers. We've got situations like the numbers of patients on 15 or more medications at the highest in the country. And we're not helping that by a complex landscape and also the way that we're delivering and transferring people's care between organisations. The fact that then a lot of that information doesn't follow those patients between organisations is another big issue. So what we know is we can do a lot around improving those health inequalities, improving access particularly for the most disadvantaged groups. I was at the Heart and Chest Board just the other day looking at how they are trying to deal with the fact that their most significant DNA rates are from those hard-to-reach populations. We're doing exactly the same work in Luft. We're doing exactly the same work in the Women's. None of it's been shared up to now, but you can see that we can do a lot better on this together. If you get into then some of the opportunities, clinical pathways-wise, there's a ton of stuff here. So we know, for example, that the Liverpool Women's Hospital, an excellent hospital delivering fantastic care, but for a small percentage of the population, we need a safer and more sustainable service on the medical side. We can provide a lot of that from the Royal Hospital, and are already starting to do so. So you can see shared anaesthetic services, blood robots going in, other things to address clinical safety. Cardiology services, there's a lot made of the sort of ACS pathway, but it's a lot wider than that actually. And if you look at, in particular, the cardiology services across the city, there's a huge opportunity for what are effectively 3 separate cardiology services almost in the City of Liverpool, to be reaching into communities and delivering different things. And there's some fantastic stuff going on from the Heart and Chest in the Widnes area at the moment with the PCN there that could be replicated to improve things outside of hospital. Stroke services, already lots of progress on that, but more to do. And you can see that there are some significant opportunities around things like PCI, thrombectomy and other things. When those things get resolved, they benefit everybody. They benefit all of the trusts in Cheshire and Merseyside and beyond who refer into those services. From a workforce perspective, there is a huge amount of churn and expense on workforce moving within the 5 hospitals. We've estimated the total cost of that on an annual basis to be circa £50 million of spend, just rotating people around systems, recruiting, then they move on. And a lot of the time that movement is around the balance of the work that they're doing. They might be in a very intensive environment in one of the acute organisations, and then they go for a break and move to one of the more planned specialist organisations, and then they come back a year later. And we could obviously make that much simpler and offer much more career progression and pathway change as a result of that. And there's obviously a lot of opportunity to do things differently in terms of bank costs and other things which we're doing already. Clinical support and diagnostics, loads of stuff already been done on this through CMAST, and you can see, and I've probably heard before, that's again excellent. However, again, you come back to these 5 hospitals, we've got different pharmacy services, they're not collaborating, they're not saving money on drug spend, we're using different systems in terms of capturing the risk of patients who move from A to B. A huge amount of opportunity on integration of digital systems there. We've still got a situation where you can have a cardiac diagnostic in the heart and chest, then come back to Luft for your appointment and we can't see it. And all of those things can be resolved with the single digital system. Research, development, innovation, again, there's a huge opportunity here. We've got excellent pockets of research across the group already, but the power and scale of that is significant. And I've just come from a meeting this morning in Liverpool, and Rowan and I were at last night at a dinner where there's the collaboration of the 5 organisations, particularly in areas like cardiovascular care, respiratory and others, would be significant. And that's not just about clinical trials, but that's about innovation outside of hospital in local communities. Corporate shared services, again, 5 completely different sets of corporate services parking in the same car parks and servicing different things, invoicing each other, just seems crazy in this day and age in terms of the challenge on the NHS budget and where that money should best be spent. So we know that there's a ton of stuff we can do there as well, and there's about £7 to £8 million in corporate costs that could be avoided if we just bring some of this stuff together. The total financial opportunity, obviously important in the current environment that we're in, again significant, somewhere between 49 and 90 million. Those scales are being worked through, so we've got some really clear ideas around some of the commercial side of things. We're still working through some of the workforce stuff, but that's the estimate that's been reviewed and proposed through PwC's analysis of our financial opportunity. So moving forward, there are a number of critical success factors. So firstly, patient and staff involvement. So we're starting now, particularly with a lot of the staff, with a big conversation process to make sure everybody's engaged and involved in how this looks going forward. We've got some real clarity around the way that this will be governed and managed. That's been inspected externally by Deloitte. It's also been inspected by the CQC with the results anticipated soon, but the verbal feedback is that is strong. One of the big things for us is the brand and culture. We want to develop a really strong brand for the UHL group in terms of its shared services, but more importantly, we want to keep the existing hospital brands to continue to attract the best talent. So we will not be known as to the population by the words UHL. People will talk about the Women's Hospital, people will talk about the Royal, and that's exactly how we want it to stay. Lots on estates and capital, and we've got, again, a number of different mixed economy versions of how estates are run at the moment. We've got delegated responsibility to the last board now on capital prioritisation, and already you can see huge opportunities where 2 organisations are about to spend the same amount of money on 2 separate theatre complexes in the same building. And why would you do that rather than making single investment decisions? And obviously digital is the big opportunity here. So you'll be aware we've now gone out to procurement. Thanks very much to John for his guidance and support on this. We've actually finally managed to get out to procurement on a single EPR, and that in itself will make a massive difference to patients because, as I said, if you come across from the women's to operate on a complex endometriosis case at the Royal, you can't see your notes from there. The cardiac patient coming from the heart and chest to Aintree can't see it either. This will solve that problem and make things a lot easier. So in summary, this is a unique opportunity really. There isn't another system like this in the country. We've got the benefits of the size and scale and the sum of the parts and the excellent care that's delivered in these hospitals already to build on. It isn't just about pathway change, this, as we've said, and it will drive a financial improvement in the system. But the major thing here is about trying to deal with some of the inequalities that exist in a system that's grown basically out of different tariff driving different outcomes in different organisations and different ability to invest. So the leaders of the 5 hospitals have all signed up to this, as you can see here, and we're already making rapid progress now. So case for change is there for your consideration today. Thank you.
Thank you, James. So the board here looking at this case for change and seeking to approve it. Questions, comments? Have I scared you all with the need to rush? Right, Mike and then Louise.
Hi, James. I think there's reference in the report to much of the estate being in reasonably good quality, which is great news, but paradoxically could create inertia. And I just wanted you to comment a little bit more about the estate issues, and particularly if we're in a constrained environment in the future in terms of capital resources being available, whether that's a challenge to be overcome, and what your thoughts are on that, please.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Mike. So the estate is largely in good order. It isn't all in good order, and we've still got, as I say, sort of, if you take the Broad Green site, for example, where there are three major organisations, Merseyside, Luft and the Liverpool Heart and Chest Hospital, there's still very expensive issues around the old Victorian estate there. If you take a sort of view of the totality of the estate, at the moment there are plans to spend 30 million on a corridor between Broad Green and Heart and Chest because it's sinking into the ground. They're the sorts of things I think we can avoid if we make a better use of the totality of the estate. Some of that will be about the better use of theatres as well. So we think, you know, the totality of the estate could shrink, but again, that would be about getting rid of some of the old Victorian stock at Aintree and at Broad Green. The best estate we've got, obviously, the new Royal. A lot of Aintree is in relatively good shape now, thanks to the funding around RAC, and the Women's is excellent estate as well. So we'd see a sort of a shrinking of that estate. I don't think it will create an inertia because the estate's master plan is going to be built on the clinical services strategy and what that needs to deliver rather than just an opportunity to shrink estate. Thank you.
Louise?
Thanks, James. Really helpful. Just to comment on the R&D innovation and commercialisation piece, quite an ambitious target there in terms of benefit. And one of the reasons that Health Innovation colleagues from Health Innovation Networks weren't able to join you last night is that we were at a parliamentary roundtable discussion in Westminster, which was looking at the future of innovation and innovation funding. And the ministerial support from that is around the Health Innovation Networks as your boots on the ground, if you like, for ensuring adoption and spread and being at the forefront of not only supporting the NHS but wealth creation as well. But what's really timely around this is the core that LASP can provide for the system, and being part of what will be a required innovation zone as a mechanism for that national funding to come through. So actually this is a really good opportunity not only for Liverpool and for your organisations together, but to actually have that centre of gravity, if you like, to attract more funding to achieve those benefits and ambitions. So very supportive of that. Thanks.
Thanks, Louise.
Thank you. Really important case for change. This is, you know, a huge step forward for the population of Liverpool and Merseyside and beyond, in fact, in terms of specialist services. You've got really clear examples of the opportunity for improved clinical pathways, and you know it's obvious that we need to do better. And you've got clear examples of the level of need in the population. So I was looking at how do we get the benefits of this case for change. And again, the document's very, very clear about the substantial financial benefits and clearly measured and so on. What I can't see, apart from general statements about we'll do better, is how you're going to hold yourselves accountable for the clinical improvements that you should be aiming for. How will your board be assured, and how will we be assured that these pathway improvements are materialising? Are you able to quantify them and really give us a clarity about those clinical benefits that we'll want to look back and say, did we realise them over a period of this transition?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's two parts to this. One is the strategy for 2030 that we're pulling together now on behalf of the organisations has two halves to it, effectively. One is this collaboration of these 5 organisations and what we can do around acute and specialist pathways. The really important one as well is the integrated care or integrated community provision that Merseyside and Alder and UHL will do in partnership as well. So when we talk about the opportunities through health innovation zones and so on and reaching into communities, I see a lot of that being done between the final UHL configuration, Merseyside and Alder and we're in parallel pulling together a case for change for how we're going to do that together. So there's another set of benefits there, because sometimes I think people look at this and don't see how's this going to help certainly neighbourhoods, and that'll be a lot more focused on that. In terms of the acute and specialist provision, what we've got are the high-level indicators of the areas where we know there are patient problems now. So thrombectomy needs to be better, for example, ACS pathway needs to be better. The clinical outcomes are going to be driven by this next stage, because we actually want the clinicians to come up with what they think the biggest priorities are. And if we talk to the cardiologists in heart and chest, ACS is important and we must resolve it, but in terms of scale and impact is here, whereas some of the other things that they're concerned about are much broader and would have a more significant impact. So the building now of the strategic case will outline all of those pathway changes, but driven from the clinical expertise rather than external consultancy view. And what that'll allow us to do then is to absolutely build in the measurement process for that. That'll come through the LAPS committee, and as that winds down to become the UHL board over time, it would obviously be reported through that.
Okay, thanks, James. I think I've got Graham and then Andrew. Andrew?
Thanks very much. Just a few comments from the perspective of the city. I mean, the case for change is compelling, and the opportunities for efficiencies, but also not just efficiency, but actually improvements in patient outcomes, and the opportunity to reorientate the resources available in acute settings within the city to re-emphasise the underlying challenge of the poor health of the local population. Absolutely critical, and it's really good to see that you know, that sort of social and economic context so prominent in your presentation. There is always a concern, of course, with aggregation that actually takes the focus of attention away from communities, and definitely welcome your comment about the importance not just of the branding of the individual institutions and sort of physical presence of the NHS within the city, but also the opportunity to then use that the goodwill that is generated to engage at a neighbourhood level much more effectively. And I think that would create a virtuous circle of both efficiencies at the system-wide level within the group as a whole, but the opportunity then to release resources to invest in the in neighbourhoods and ultimately in the better population health of the local area. And if we can get that to work within the city of Liverpool, that would be enormously helpful. Just to welcome as well the emphasis on scale in improving the innovation ecosystem of the city, particularly in areas of health and life sciences where we have a lot to offer. We're recognised nationally as being a centre of innovation in health and life sciences, and by using the strength of the collective organisations of the city, I'm sure we can do that more. And also just to recognise that the University Hospitals of Liverpool Group will become the biggest anchor institution in the city of Liverpool, and that brings with it obligations to play a really important role, not just within the NHS, but as the biggest employer, the biggest influence of community outcomes across the city. And I know you see that obligation, James, because we talk about it frequently, but it's just something worth identifying as a really important outcome of the changes that you're making.
Thanks, Andrew. Graham?
Chair, thank you. James, Tim, thank you very much. We asked you to do this, and you've responded, and I think you've responded really well, and I think this is really clear. I think what you've heard today, our first focus will always be on the improvements for the people that we serve, those clinical outcomes, the coherence of those pathways. And I think you've posited, you know, the whole case really well within that. But I do then reflect on the governance. So I think in getting us to where we've got to today, what you know is that the chair and I have met with you, your chairs, your chief executives, but I guess we'd have called that a task and finish process. What we've done here is we've brought this into, you know, the governance of our board, asking our board to endorse this. We know that you've taken this through all of your individual boards. So I think that next point is exactly what Ruth has asked. We now need to solidify the oversight governance for this and say absolutely clearly which part of those kind of clinical improvements in outcomes and care pathways do we want to hold you to account for through this governance process, as opposed to things that are kind of business as usual governance, because there's there's probably 100 things that my teams are talking to your teams about on a daily basis, but this is the big showpiece around change. But saying first and foremost it's about clinical outcomes, it's about the coherence of care pathways, and of course secondly that rapid progress to a financially sustainable system is fundamentally important to us all as well. I was going to say, but you've already said it in answer to those questions. This isn't about just our acute services. This is also fundamentally about the place-based governments and how the place partnership develops. And I know you talked very clearly about building that case for change around UHL, Older Hay and Merseyside, but we need to make sure that children's services, adult social care, is fundamentally embedded and anchored within that piece of work as well. For me, Chair, I would ask that the board endorses this, echoes the kind of thanks, asks James and colleagues to keep going at pace and cement and anchor these changes, but then we'll agree with you through the meetings that we have with you and your chairs the future ongoing milestones and governance and how we bring that back into a proper governance forum. And I think, for me, this has been a long time in its making, and actually we did get to a tipping point. We're past that tipping point now, and it's really, really encouraging to see how this is coming together, so thank you again.
Thank you, Graham. Well said. Okay, I'm going to move to asking the board to approve this case for change. I'm going to take everybody's nods as yeah, and once again, James and Tim, thank you for coming here today, but also for the immense amount of work and the progress you're making.
Thank you, and thanks very much again for the support from the ICB as well. Thank you.
Thanks. Okay, so if we could move on, Fiona.
Thank you. Can I just check who's got control of the slides, Matthew? Please. Thank you, Tim. Where do I point it, Matthew? Those ones. Okay. I will talk without slides in view of the time while Matthew goes and has a little look for them. So this is the us formally bringing back the report on the engagement that we did on improving hospital gynaecology and maternity services in Liverpool. So, as you know, Case for Change was approved in October, and there followed the 6-week engagement period. As is best practice, when you do engagement work like this, an independent company called Hood & Wolf was brought in to analyse the materials that were gathered in the engagement events and produce an independent report. The full report is in the pack of papers today, and I'm going to take it as read. The board today is being asked to note the report and to acknowledge that the findings of the report will now be a critical part of the options appraisal work which has started through the programme board. Again, I would emphasise that this piece of work was an engagement process rather than a consultation. And is part of that very specific major service change process that we go through when we're looking to improve services.
We asked people in the engagement period, we asked the public to reflect on the case for change, which was the summary of the drivers and challenges of why we think that change is needed, to share their experiences of women's services and to tell us what is important to them when we think about how those services are going to be delivered in the future. We didn't present options for them to comment on because we haven't got to that stage yet. The information that we've got from this stage will inform the options that we will come up with and would consider in order to make services safer and to improve patient experience. And then, as appropriate, depending on the outcome of that options appraisal, we would then be into a period of public consultation. The main method of gathering feedback was a patient questionnaire, which was supported with some very public-friendly, patient-friendly summaries of the case for change. We had 913 responses, which is to the questionnaire, 913 completed questionnaires, which was higher than, because as you all know, we have done public engagement on the women's services before. And so this is a, lovely, thank you. So this is a higher number of responses than we'd had previously, thank you. We had 6 in-person events, and a total of 71 different individuals attended those events. We used 6 community organisations to support us in this engagement process, and you can see the wide variety. This was us looking very specifically to make sure that we covered all demographic backgrounds. Those organisations helped us with translation into 16 different languages of the materials. They helped people to complete the questionnaire. They helped to promote the questionnaire. And there is quite a detailed breakdown of the demographics of the population that we managed to engage with in the report. At the last Women's Services Committee, we had a very in-depth review of the whole report. And so just to assure you that the committee has taken a very deep dive, so that today I'm only going to cover a couple of bits, a couple of highlighting key findings, and then a couple of the lessons that we learnt from this process that we're going to take forward and make sure that we do it even better next time. So we asked the question, do you think we've clearly described why hospital gynaecology and maternity services need to change? And 62% of those who responded fully said that we had fully explained, and 26% said we had partly explained. There we go. And then we asked, how much do you agree or disagree with the statement that the NHS needs to make changes to hospital gynaecology and maternity services? So again, that general need for change rather than offering specific changes. And 82% agreed that we were right to say that we need to make changes. We asked people to reflect upon their experience of care that they're receiving at the moment. And most people had a very positive experience of care, but we did see that there were a significant percentage who did not. And the slide there highlights some of the reasons why. And it is quite concerning when you see that staff attitude and compassion is one of the themes that people said that a lack of compassion was one of the things that people were concerned about and were experiencing now. So the Trust does take that very seriously, and they have received all of this feedback and will use it in their day-to-day work to make sure that they tackle all of these themes around patient experience. We had similar responses about the question about do people feel disadvantaged. And again, that is really important when you think about, we've just heard James talking about how deprived and how disadvantaged our population is to start with. So again, we've shared all that, and that will inform the next stage of the process. We have benefited from having support from public health colleagues who have produced a very detailed report for us to consider in the next process about the deprivation, the disadvantage that our population that use these services faces. We asked the people in the public about what was important to them in the future, and this is really important that we take this into the options appraisal, and we'll take this into our first workshop, which is due to take place on the 1st of May for the next stage. So what did we learn about the process of doing this engagement? It was clear from the feedback that there was a very strong preference for completing a questionnaire over attending events. We still consider that in-person events are really important for sharing information and for having a dialogue. The questionnaire allows a more considered response from people. It helps us to capture the views of those people who can't or don't want to come to those in-person events. And so we will take that forward next time and use our in-person events more to promote the questionnaire to help capture views. There's some technical learning about the process and using technology, QR codes, for example, to allow us to track different types and the effectiveness of different types of communication. And then we've learned that we can do even more with our wider partners and with the staff who deliver these services. They are really critical to us engaging with the public and encouraging the public to share their views. So we've learned that we can do that even better. Next steps, as I've said, we're moving on to the next stage of the process, which we will keep the board updated on in due course. I just wanted to finish by saying a big thank you to our lived experience panel and highlighting the work that they've done. So this is a group of around about 25 volunteers who have come together since July last year. So people with previous or current experience of the services, or carers of people or loved ones of people who have current experience of the services. That group's met at least 3 times since before the engagement started. They were really helpful and critical in helping us to develop our approach to the engagement to make sure we were getting it right, and they are critical to the next stage of the process as well, where they'll help support us with the options appraisal. And we are expanding that lived experience panel and are currently recruiting for more people, and I just wanted to highlight their work and thank them for it. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Fiona. Any questions or comments, Fiona? Okay. Graham?
This is obviously an essential piece of work. There are things that are relevant to the kind of strategic commissioning of the service in the future, but there are also things that are relevant and should be fed back into our work around quality committees and work with the organisation. So I think one, you know, there's some really quite sad stories that are played out within this. So one, I think the board should have some assurance about how we're using that, how we're taking that back, and we're learning from it. But I think the second thing in terms of this report is a stage in a process. I think for me it's the next steps, and I think it's being really, really clear with the board and the others what are the next steps from here. So the paper says that's the work of the Women's Services Committee. We have had a timeline in the past, but I do think we should republish that timeline and confirm that we are on that timeline or we are not on that timeline. So when are people going to see, you know, the agreement to a set of options that we may be consulting upon? Because I think that for me, if you listen to the questions we've had this morning and the questions about, well, you didn't ask this question, well, the answer is we weren't at that point yet. So if we are going to ask that question, and I know that's not determined yet, but if we're going to ask such a question, when will that become apparent? When will we see that? And if we're not clear today, I think we should have a kind of note round to absolutely clarify, are we absolutely still on the timeline that we published at a previous board meeting? Thank you.
Yep.
So we do have a high-level indicative timeline for next steps. We've got some that are very specific, so the 1st of May and a date very early in June for 2 workshops, bringing the clinicians and our lived experience panel and other stakeholders together to start talking about hurdle criteria, evaluation criteria, developing our long list of options, and then bringing that to a short list of options. So we think we'll have done that work by July. There then is a period of time, July, August, where there's a lot of work will need to be done on costing, modelling, and really examining the options that this group come up with, and bringing them into a set of proposed final options, with possibly with a preferred option. We don't know yet, there might not be, and then so the time that we would be looking to go out to public consultation on all of that work would not be before, I'm looking at Helen, September, but actually more likely well into the beginning of 2026. But we will be reporting on it in the outputs of it as we go along for the board.
Okay, thank you, Fiona. Okay, I'm going to move us on. Claire, I think you're leading next item.
Yeah. Yes, thank you. So each year the ICB has a statutory duty to publish its joint forward plan by the end of March. So Appendix 1 in this paper is our light touch refresh, which sets out our headline priorities for 25-26. It's our summary annual delivery plan. You can see it's interactive and it will be on the website, and you can do all the links through to other documents, which I think is really helpful. The full annual delivery plan and strategic tracker will be presented in May. We intend to develop and publish a refresh of the joint forward plan as our response to the NHS 10-year plan later this year. So in line with national priority planning and system pressures and priorities, we've developed our 2 key areas of focus in 24-25. That was finance and improving and trying to achieve financial sustainability and improve urgent and emergency care performance. For this year, 25-26, we've identified 2 other key areas. That's neighbourhood health, which we've touched on quite a lot this morning already, and link that with population health and also planned care. So our top 4 priorities are supported by strategic and enabling priorities and programmes. So slide 2 of the appendix, or 2.4 in the document, illustrates how our priorities reflect sort of local planning, national priorities and system pressures. And then the next slide, which is slide 4, are our defining principles which have guided us to determine our top priorities. These are consistent and reflect our 4 overall strategic objectives for the ICB and sit within that frame for our HCP Altogether Fairer strategy. Slide 5 of the document really is our summary annual delivery plan. It pulls everything together and I think reflects really well in a really succinct way how we're going to work in the coming year. We have really tried to cut it down, as you can see. We'll give you more information at the next board meeting in May, but I think even within these 4 top priorities, and the underpinning strategic enable programs, there's an awful lot to do, and we've got to reflect that. But I think by having 4 top priorities, it gives us a real focus for 25-26, which is not just about finance and about urgent care, but really, really, if you look at section 4, the focus is on population and neighbourhood health. There's a lot of information in there, and Tony and I just had a conversation about that, but it does detail all the work that we've got to do to make those shifts that the government's talked about in the planning guidance. So I asked the board to support the document so we can publish it on the website by the end of the financial year, so that will be next week, and happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Claire. Any questions or comments on this? I've got one ask of you, Claire, for the May annual delivery plan, where we might know a bit more information about how we're evolving as a overall system, given these recent changes, and it start to articulate what you think our role as strategic commissioner will be and how we're building those capabilities.
Yep, that's absolutely fine. Okay. We've been talking about that, so we'll bring that through in May.
Fantastic.
Thank you.
Okay, people happy to approve this? This is a submission we need to release, yeah? Okay, thank you. Mark.
Thanks, Chair. The purpose of the next report is to provide the board with an update on the work that has been undertaken to develop the ICB financial plan for the 25-26 financial year in accordance with the national NHS England planning deadlines. The paper provides an overview of the latest position that was reported to NHS England, but are based on assumptions as of the 14th of March. They include the key assumptions that have driven the plan and some of the risks that obviously sit in and around the planning assumptions as a result. Pleased to say that at the time of writing, the report was forecasting a break-even plan for the 25-6 financial year. And just to say that obviously that planning environment is still very live as I sit here today, so returns are due today and lots of activities still going on in the background. In terms of the wider ICS position, which again we will talk about during the course of this meeting and no doubt future meetings, that was still being developed at the time of writing, but I can give an update later today in terms of where we've got to on that basis. Cheshire and Merseyside system as a total has been set a maximum deficit control total of £178 million for the 25-6 year, so obviously that's a key number when we talk about both the ICB and indeed the wider provider perspective. In terms of the report, it sets out more details in terms of both the resource and the expenditure assumptions for the year ahead, and most of that detail is included in sections 3 and 4 in order to deliver that break-even position, and I'm going to draw out a few key elements in each of those sections now. In terms of the resources, the ICB has received some additional growth in its allocation to cover national expectations about inflationary and activity changes for the year ahead. However, a couple of key points I wanted to draw to your attention. We do remain over target as a system, so we receive more allocation than the national formula suggests we should, and therefore we are and continue to be subject to national convergence adjustments to our allocation. I should also point out that due to the historic deficits of both the individual providers and indeed historic CCGs, there is a system deficit repayment element that again features in our allocation processes. Just one last point to acknowledge on the allocations is that for the first year in 25-6, some of the previous historical NHS England allocations that were called Service Development Funding, or SDF for short, are now included in the ICB allocations and are unring-fenced for the first time, and further details on those are included in Appendix 1. In terms of the expenditure assumptions, again, more detail in the paper, largely in Section 4. They include the methodology by which we've generated the plan for this year, and they use a combination of both our local run rates and indeed some of the national planning assumptions in getting us to the end point. I would point you to the table in Section 4.4, which sets out the main high-level expenditure values across areas of the ICB responsibility, with some supporting narrative about the expected spend in each of those different areas. Next element to draw to your attention, I'm going to do in slightly reverse order within the paper, and hopefully this will become clearer. So section 4.34 sets out the provisional areas of the ICB's cash release and efficiency savings, and they again were at the time of writing. These total just over £98 million for the year ahead, and span across normal savings requirements in the areas of continuing healthcare, prescribing, packages of care, and importantly tackling some of the variation that we know exist within the ICB, building on the work that we've done in the last year around the recovery programme. These values are and have been developed in partnership between the different parts of the organisation, including the senior officers who will take lead responsibility for delivering those savings, and have also used a combination of top-down and bottom-up approaches, using some of the national productivity and opportunity packs that we've been given for this year, and including some of the work that the local teams have done to identify opportunities to derive those values for the 25-6 year. We've also included a series of other demand management and cost avoidance activities which are equally as important in that sense, and again we will look to manage that through the normal process. At this point I'd just like to add that the ICB is strengthening its governance and further grip around its saving programmes for the 25-6 year, taking into account some of the learning that we've had in the last 12 months and the learning from the recovery programme and external support that we had during the last period, which hopefully we can continue to implement and embed within the organisation. We have a newly formed financial control and oversight group which will meet for the first time in April. That will receive regular updates on the ICB savings programme. That reports into the FERC committee and will be further strengthened by the support from the ICB's new Chief System Improvement and Delivery Officer from the start of April. The reason why I've done it in reverse order is that should these savings and those other planning assumptions hold true, pleased to say it creates a small, and I will caveat small, investment fund for us to try and target some emerging risks and pressures that we know are challenging some parts of our population and communities for the 25-6 year. And again, there's a bit more information in the pack about some of those target areas. I should say that they are obviously still very provisional, very subject to the governance that we need to take them through in terms of seeking approval, but I hope we'll give a little bit of light at the end of the tunnel for some of the challenged areas that I know the board has discussed, and indeed in lots of our place partnership boards in terms of some of those challenges. Also to point out that we are able, as it stands, to increase our investment in the Health Inequalities programme. Again, there's a bit more work to do on some of the components of that, but again, hopefully that seems a welcome step to supporting some of the key enablers of improving outcomes across our patch. The final element of the report is in section 5. That includes some of the updated capital plans, or the headline numbers notwithstanding. That there is still work to do. That also includes some information about the national capital allocations that we've received this year to hope address a number of the specific emerging priorities, as you can see in the report. On that basis, Chair, I'll ask the board to do a couple of things, if that's okay. So note the progress being made on the revenue plans for the 25-6 year and the current forecast at the time of writing for a break-even position. Note that the ICS position is still being developed at the time of writing, but we need to meet a national system control deficit of 178 million, and that we will continue to update both the committees and the boards in line with the requirements of us. And the next paper will include a wider assessment of some of the risks and mitigations in order to deliver that ICS position. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mark. Any questions or comments on this? It's here for noting, and we know where further iterations. Ruth?
Thank you. Thank you, Mark. I mean, obviously, keen to see how we manage to close the circle on this one. Just one specific point about specialised commissioning. There is a reference in the table, a budget line against specialised commissioning, but there's no narrative against it. So I wonder if you could comment on the investment plans and the position on specialised commissioning going forward. If you would, please.
Yeah, happy to, and if Claire wants to join me on that, that would be welcome. So, specialised commissioning, we get a additional allocation into the ICB, which is based on an agreed set of services for us to commission. Obviously, we work closely in partnership with our specialist commissioning colleagues and also our neighbouring ICBs, because much of this is done in partnership. We are still working through the expenditure plans for the financial year ahead. There are, as ever, a number of risks and issues in the specialist commissioning contracts that they hold with their providers. A number of those are obviously both historic in nature, but equally, you know, are subject to the same challenges that we have in terms of emerging pressures. They are also subject to the same convergence and or growth challenges in their budgets as we are. But hopefully the next report that we can bring to you will give much more information on the plans for the specialised commissioning component of what we have. Claire, would you like to add anything?
Just to say, we've obviously got the joint committee between the 3 ICBs and the North West team. We've got another meeting next week where we're going to review the programmes and the priorities, because if I'm honest, I think there are a lot, and we have asked the team in liaison with obviously the 3 ICBs looking at our work programmes for them to be more consistent and be sort of end to end, and also look at just the capacity to deliver on them. So there are a number of programmes that will probably be paused because they haven't yet commenced, and we'll have to manage through it on a different sort of phasing some of the programmes that the team are looking to commission. So we'll do that next week in the joint committee. We had our local operational group yesterday. There are some local priorities that will continue, but again, I think we need to look at this sort of the timing and the pacing of those both because of everything else going on.
Thank you. That's really helpful. I think we just need to keep an eye on that, because that's a sort of shared responsibility in some respect, but we have taken on responsibility. Completely separate question, very quickly. We made a strategic commitment to invest increasing sums in prevention, and I know how hard the financial context is. Could you just explain to us, where are we in that commitment with this proposed budget?
Thanks, Ruth. Yeah, so I think still early days, but hopefully you'll see in the report there are a number of areas that we're hoping to be able to, you know, not only embed but improve. We've touched on a few this morning, so virtual wards being an example, hopefully the health inequalities investment. There are a number of other measures in there which I will defer to my clinical colleagues that we believe are pushing towards shifting left. They are more preventative in their approach. You'll see in the paper, I always pronounce it wrong, so apologies. Elastomerics, I always put a T in the middle. Elastomerics is one where if we do the right things, it should reduce length of stay, it should improve outcomes. So while small in nature, I think we are starting to shift an element where we can in that direction. Clearly there's more to do, and what I would like to do as part of the medium long-term plan, which again I know we keep coming back to, is describe and define some measures by which we can put some numbers and or percentages around that, backing, you know, what evidence and what research tells us are the right things to do in that process, notwithstanding the financial challenges that we have. You know, I will not kid anyone. Next year is going to be really challenging in terms of delivery of the savings that you see in the paper, but I do think there are opportunities. I think we all know that, and hopefully the grip and the control and the programme structure that we have around that will allow us to release that funding to then redirect it into the areas by which we think are the right things to do. So I think we've made a very, very small step, Ruth, but hopefully it's the start of the direction that we want to take.
Right, let me just make a comment on that question. So I think to be able to answer that question more precisely, we need that piece of work that defines what prevention means for us. I know, Ian, you're onto that, aren't you? And nationally, I think there's some work, but let's not wait for the national work because it could be a while. And then we're able to see what the allocation is against that, what this board defines as prevention, because there'll be a debate about what that means. Let's get that out. Erica.
We've talked about the importance of staying within the budgets, who's accountable, who's responsible, and the really good way that that's been done this time. Can I just ask a question about CHC and the cash releasing? If you look at the rationales on those, all of them are looking at that we've really scrutinised them and we're happy with them internally. You'll see that, I don't know if you can see it, but the rationale on that one is national benchmarking, and I know we've talked about that before. Are we comfortable that that is the right guide that we are being assessed against?
So I'm pleased that Alison's with us. Alison's been doing a bit more detailed work, but I'll give you an initial response. So we've all been given, both ICBs and providers, a series of opportunity, productivity and other packs. So in the area of CHC, a figure of £52 million was deemed as our local opportunity for that. As ever, with that information, there's always a bit of sort of, you know, you pull it apart a little bit and you know, you never quite get to the same number. However, when you take out things like funded nursing care, which there isn't a financial saving that can be achieved by the rate of FNT because it's a fixed figure, but you can do other things. That figure of 28 million is the figure within the 52. So we're in broad agreement that figure is an opportunity that we believe, based on all the work that has been done, and again I'll ask maybe Alison to comment on that, we believe is an area of opportunity. I think we know that we've had a period of change, the operating model, the information systems that perhaps don't lend themselves to a system that we would want to have, but every conversation I have internally and indeed externally suggests that we can drive out that cost saving. In a few areas I think are more than others, so I think Fast Tracks is one particular example where we've got not only variation but an increased level of spend, the level of sort of one-to-ones and or additional support, again there's work to do there. But I think then again in general terms that managing the market more effectively and working with our local authority colleagues to make sure that again we're not pushing costs between us but actually we're reducing total system costs. So very confident that we've got a good plan around that. And what I would say I suppose is the budget for this year hopefully will be more reflective of outturn in a way perhaps that wasn't done previously due to any use of national planning assumptions. I suppose the last point to make is that we're not stopping at 28, and I wouldn't want anyone to think that just because that's the plan, that's where we are. Continue to look at opportunities. Indeed, nationally, in our recent call that myself and Graham attended with the national CFO and his team, they believe there is more to go at for us locally. What I suppose I would try and argue, though, is it's fine to say the number very quickly, but what we need to have is the detailed plans that sit behind it, and that's what we need to do locally with the team. So again, working with Alison and the new sort of leadership around that, how do we really push on with a detailed set of plans that make that happen? So 28 feels reasonable and comfortable in terms of, yes, it's a stretch, but I think we know what we need to do. We need to go further and faster where possible. So Alison, if you want to add anything to that.
I thought that was excellent, Mark, so I haven't got much more to add. I think what I would say is one of the investments that we want to make from that small reserve is, and it's called an administrative system in the paper, but this is the new digital system, which is an end-to-end clinical and finance system. And I think some of the reasons for our inefficiency is the clunkiness between the systems the clinical teams are using and tracking it in finance. So we already invest in 4 systems. There will be some efficiencies if we get to one digital system. So I was going to say that. In terms of the opportunities, I think there are 2 things where we are at variance. One is fast track. So not only are we at variance, we are the 10th or so highest ICB. It varies quarter by quarter. But within the ICB, there is a 3-fold variation by place on eligibility for fast track packages. So we have got to do something about the commissioning of end-of-life and palliative care to stop that variation. So we know from our heat map, our intelligence on our business information system, which places we need to focus on. So we've got to have differential effort. It is not a blanket approach across the ICB. The other area is eligibility for CHC. So again, we are not able to support people with the universal service offer, and we have a 4-fold variation within the ICB by place on that eligibility. So there is something again about focusing our effort on the 3 or 4 places within the ICB where we're going to deliver most of these savings. And I think the work that we've done to pull that together on our business intelligence platform, so thank you to Anthony's staff who've developed that, enables us now to know where we need to focus. And having the additional capacity and capabilities of a service improvement director to wrap around and help us with some of this, I think it's going to be really, really helpful in the year ahead. That'll be my additionality. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So the report was there for noting. Yep, we're happy to note. Let's move, Mike, should we go to your paper?
Yeah, thank you. Will you yeah, so colleagues, this shouldn't come as a surprise. This is a piece of work that you've been supporting for quite some time, and this is really to ask board today to endorse care leavers as a priority recruitment group across Cheshire and Merseyside, and in particular, to all intents and purposes, that we would treat this as a protected characteristic. Paul's come along, he's one of the authors of the paper, just to very quickly sort of outline some of the next steps as well, but also to give you a feel of the scope and breadth of some of the work and the need for support in this area. Paul?
Welcome, Paul. Just introduce yourself quickly.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name's Paul Martin. I work for Mike. I'm part of the people team. I'm head of workforce programs.
Great. Off you go.
Is there a clicker for the... Yeah, just get it. Thank you. Thank you. So in the interest of time, I'll jump straight in. So across Cheshire and Merseyside, we currently have over 5,000 children in care. Over a quarter of them are over the age of 16, meaning that we're dealing with a growing workforce of young people who are preparing for adulthood and also preparing for the workforce. In that demographic, about 14% of those young people are from ethnic minority backgrounds, with a gender split of around 56% male to 44% female. And what this does, it reinforces the need for a workforce response that's both inclusive and intersectional. What's also important and is really often overlooked is the high prevalence of disability and neurodiversity in this group of people, young people. Many care leavers have special educational needs with greater instances of autism, ADHD, and mental health needs. And this signals a clear need for a tailored, supported employment pathway, which we're hoping to provide. On the right hand of the slide, you'll see some of the entrenched barriers that our care leavers face, things like disrupted education, unstable housing, limited access to guidance, and mental health pressures. And these aren't abstract issues, these directly affect their readiness and access to stable employment. And crucially, many of them lack informal networks that help others into work, such as someone just to be able to help with things like their CV, or even to secure a reference can be a real challenge for this group of people. And these figures and challenges just highlight why us as Cheshire and Merseyside must act, not just because we're a large employer, but because now we have both a moral and legal responsibility under the corporate parenting duties that were announced recently. So in terms of some of the challenges that we've identified for care leavers, firstly, there's a recognition and a policy gap. Care leavers aren't formally acknowledged as a priority group in NHS recruitment. And crucially, they're not protected under the Equality Act 2010. This means they're often overlooked in workforce inclusion efforts. Second, we see some really clear employment barriers. So these include things like strict reference requirements, rigid job descriptions, and entry criteria that simply don't reflect the lived experience of care leavers. And these technicalities unintentionally exclude people who are otherwise very capable and committed to joining our workforce. And then thirdly, even when care leavers are recruited, there's career and retention issues, and so without proper structured support and mentorship, it's difficult for them to build long-term NHS careers, and we risk losing care leavers quite early in their careers. So I guess the question is, what can we do about it? We've put together some proposed solutions that we feel are both practical and targeted. We want to prioritise care leavers explicitly within our workforce strategy and recognise them in the same ways we consider other inclusion groups. We propose improving recruitment pathways with guaranteed interviews, things like ring-fence placements and apprenticeship schemes, all designed to level that playing field. Retention matters too, so we need to strengthen career support, offering coaching, mentoring and structured career planning from the outset. And finally, we'd really value visible leadership, and we want to recommend appointing an executive champion to help us drive this agenda across the system and push for a national policy recognition to embed care leavers' inclusion into NHS workforce planning. So these are just some of the current initiatives. I won't go through them all, but I just wanted to pick out two of the kind of more prevalent initiatives that we have currently. So the first is a partnership that we have with a charity called Spectra 25/7, and this is one of our flagship initiatives. It's funded partly by NHSE and delivered in collaboration across our system. It's looking at actively recruiting 25 care leavers into healthcare positions across our ICS. We've had a great response from our trust, and as of this morning, we've got approximately 30 vacancies that are being protected for our care leavers. What makes Spectra different is its emphasis on structure and support. We're not just about offering jobs to care leavers. We're offering careers that are backed up by mentoring, onboarding guidance, and a clear development pathway. And it's a great example of some of the collaboration that we've been able to have with some of our trusts. Highlight, for example, we've been able to collaborate with Merseyside, who've got an amazing workforce experience for about 8 care leavers. We're hopefully going to take an additional 2 through an apprenticeship route supported by Spectra. So a great example. In addition, a fantastic response from our Liverpool University hospitals, who've given us 15 positions for this programme, which has been amazing in this current climate. The second programme we wanted to talk about, unfortunately, Catherine and Bryony couldn't be here to share about this programme, was the Atlas programme, which is for care experienced medical students. So this is a collaboration between Alder Hey, the University of Liverpool, and Edge Hill University. We all know that care leavers are severely underrepresented in higher education and face significant barriers, and they're 2.5 times likely more to drop out of their education in their first year. And so these challenges are even more pronounced in medicine, where students face intense academic and emotional pressures. And despite good intentions, none of the 6 local medical schools that they surveyed had any data or specific support structures in place for care leavers at that time. Atlas is designed to fill that gap, not by lowering standards, but building in a differentiated support that reflects lived experience. The programs aim to provide mentoring, professional navigation and emotional support, especially during the critical first year of medical school, which is a make or break period for many young people. Both universities are fully on board, and we see this as a Cheshire and Merseyside-wide programme reinforcing the leadership role of our ICB in workforce inclusion and widening participation. And the name of this programme is based on Greek mythology. It represents both guidance and strength, and it's about helping students carry the weight of expectation and find their way forward. So just to kind of wrap up with the next steps in terms of what will happen next, we've outlined 5 key steps that we feel will help us embed meaningful and lasting change in this area. Firstly, we're asking for care leavers to be formally recognised as a priority recruitment group across NHS Cheshire and Merseyside. This simple policy shift will give us a mandate to align our recruitment practices with our social responsibilities and reflects our commitment to inclusive recruitment. Data does matter, and we're recommending voluntary self-identification in our ESR system to help us track progress, not only on recruitment but also on retention. And without this, we'll have no way of measuring the effectiveness of our interventions or identifying any areas for support. We also want to scale up what's working well, so projects like Spectra and Atlas, which we've just described, we'd want to extend those kind of programs across our system, establishing a community of practice, connecting care leavers, mentors and hiring managers and partners to create a consistent and supportive experience. We're also, as we mentioned earlier, we'd love to propose the appointment of an executive champion for our care leavers. This will provide clear leadership and accountability and someone with a visible remit to drive this agenda forward for us. And we want to go further by advocating nationally for care leavers to be recognised as a protected group. So these steps we feel are all achievable within our current structures and will position us as a national leader in workforce inclusion and, more importantly, as a system that lives its values. I'll pause there. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Paul. Can I just kick off and just say a few words which people know this. I'm a very, very strong advocate for further investment in children and young people. And we've identified through the Children and Young People Committee as this, it's a cohort of individuals who have such poor outcomes and need additional support to enable them to reach their full potential. So great stuff here, Mike and Paul. It is missing a delivery plan, I think, understanding what's the cost associated with this and how we're going to track the actions that are in here. So I'll come back to some of that. I know I've got Hilary, so I'm going to go Hilary, Chris, Ruth, and then Steve.
My point was how we're going to track progress, so you've covered that. But the second thing is, we also have Chester University, a colleague here, Professor from Chester University, so it's probably better I raise it, with a great medical school, newly opened. So it's about including all the feeder universities for our workforce and extending that to nursing and allied health professionals as well. I'm sure you get a lot of support for that. But great report and brilliant presentation, so thank you.
Let's go down this way. Who was next? Missed. Chris, is it?
It was just a comment really to say that each of our associate directors of quality at every over 9 places that support a corporate parenting board and working in partnership with the directors of children's services to make it's important that the child and young person's voice is at the centre of what we do. So that is currently ongoing and we continue to do that.
Fabulous, thanks. Thanks, Ruth.
Really support this, in terms of improving life chances and outcomes. I was at a charity only 2 weeks ago where they were celebrating people going through their Steps to Work programme, especially people with additional needs. And I just had a nervousness that the NHS was creating its own way of doing things, whereas in fact what some of these organisations need is a partner who can actually offer employment opportunities or placements and so on. So please, make sure you encompass all the other agencies who are doing some fantastic things and really have a strong track record in this area, rather than develop bespoke things on our own. That is my plea. Thank you.
Yeah, a fabulous way of accelerating impact, I think, there from Ruth. Steve?
Well, just to build on what Chris and Ruth have said, really, it's a really great initiative that helps us to fulfil our social value objectives and inclusive workforce. All the 9 councils on our patch are working really strongly around corporate parenting, working with care leave, and I do urge you to work with the Director of Children's Services. There's lots of initiatives taking place. So, for instance, care leavers now get free bus passes, rail passes, home into employment. That could be possibly extended to the NHS side as well. So it's a real classic of working in an integrated way to benefit care leavers. Thanks.
So we've had some fantastic report.
Just make a quick comment on that. So Chris is our exec lead for Children and Young People. We're doing this through the System Children Board, CYP board, and DCS is absolutely involved in that. Go, Mike?
It's difficult not to agree with what's being set out here. It makes eminent good sense. However, in the juxtaposition of a 50% reduction, I'm sure we're going to have to decide which are our essentials and which are our desirables. And there'll be a group of desirables where we've really got to make some tough choices in terms of how we allocate resources, in terms of our ability to deliver all of these objectives. So I'm just putting a marker down that at some point in the very near future we are going to have to think about how we make tough choices around all the many initiatives like this that we're asked to support.
Really important. That's why we need to see the delivery plan with understanding what the costs of this are. What's going on? Andrew, I think, is next.
Thanks very much. I mean, I regard this as a critically important, indeed essential intervention. It's something that weighs heavy on us. 1,400 children in care in Liverpool alone. I think you said 5,000 across the region. So the scale of our responsibility is huge here. It's a corporate parent responsibility, and the principle is that we support our young people in the care system with the same diligence that we would apply to our own children, and it's really good to see examples of that here. Just a couple of things. Well, and I really welcome it. I think it's great that it's embedded in the work of the children's services directors from each of the 9 authority areas. just a point about scale, really, that the initiatives are fantastic, but actually when you look at the numbers against the need and the interest here, and the positive opportunity to secure a really committed source of new recruitment into the NHS, I do wonder whether it could be scaled up and mainstreamed into wider practice. Often what we found in Liverpool is that we were supporting care leavers too late in the process. We were engaging with people at the ages of 16, 17, 18, when it should have been at 14. I noticed one of the initiatives with Alder Hay specifically addresses this by coming in at an earlier stage, and I would encourage you to get engaged at that level at scale. Often speaking to young people who are care experienced, they have a very strong commitment to working in the caring professions, partly because their lived experience has often exposed them disproportionately to support from NHS and social care staff, and often that does generate within them a really strong commitment to contribute into that system. And I think capturing that probably from the age of 14, as people's career aspirations begin to solidify, I think would be enormously helpful, not just for them, but actually for NHS employers in securing a really committed workforce for the future. And I would disagree, I think, with the recommendation in 5.5 not to formally constitute care experience as equivalent to a protected characteristic, if I've understood that right. I can see that you want to lobby for that change statutorily, but I think all the councils in the region have committed to treating care experience as if it were a statutory protected characteristic and applying exactly the same rigours that we do to other protected characteristics to this group. And I would encourage the whole of the ICB to consider that as an important step.
I'll come back to that last point at the end. I've got Ellen and then Ian.
Yeah, concur with everything that colleagues have said, and I think that this, in terms of impact measuring and having an understanding of this kind of intervention, I think it's a real opportunity for us to see the impact of prevention and to look at our social value and also look at our values that we've articulated, and therefore understanding the impact of this sort of intervention into the future. So, I mean, it's all present there, but just to push that forward as a key thing for us to use this as well as a test case for learning and the impact of such things, because it's such a significant group of people that we could have an impact on and we can learn from.
Thank you. And Ian?
It was just, thank you for the report. I think in the main report it also references the children's wellbeing and schools bill that's going through the process for students for second reading in May at the House of Lords. And in that detail there's more onus on NHS bodies in that space. So we're very much aligned to us getting ready for that and the healthcare partnership ambition around the outcomes of children and young people.
Thanks, Ian. Paul, Mike, anything before I go to the recommendations? Anything more?
No, it's just to add that in terms of the recognition, we will be aligning with it as though it was a protected characteristic, but not just to confuse it with the other current law.
And just to say that, so obviously we're anticipating board support, so then we can go and, sort of scope out the budget that we need, and it's clearly a priority.
Thank you, Mike. So let's go to the recommendations. So recognise care leavers as a priority group, but what we mean by that is treating them the same as protected characteristic. Let's be really, really clear on that. There's the data collection ESR. Strengthen recruitment pathways. We need to, at the appropriate time, Mike, through your report to this board, let's understand the progress we're making and let's set some trajectories. I was really taken by Andrew's point about scale. It feels low numbers at the moment, but we don't know the totality of what's happening. Let's understand. Let's be ambitious. Do we have an executive champion? Has one been appointed or volunteered?
Not really.
So I'm going to... Chris, are you volunteering to be the executive champion?
Yeah, I'll work with Mike to do that.
Great. Thank you. And there's expanding, then there's the details, isn't it, about how we're going to do some of this in terms of mentoring and coaching support. Yeah. And policy change nationally. So let's see that delivery plan and the budget that's required for this before we can give it the go-ahead. People comfortable with that position? Yeah, okay. Thank you. Moving on, we've got the minutes of the previous meetings. I'm going to seek any matters arising, any corrections for seeking your approval. We had all the corrections in. Seek your approval. Yep, thank you. Action log, there's some actions that need updating here. Claire, I know one of them's yours about the operating model. We need to write something there, I think.
Sorry, do you want me to answer that?
Yeah.
Well, I guess in terms of the operating model, we'll have further discussions in light of the announcements, but I think we are looking to try and bring something to the next meeting. So I think we need to sort of move forward with that, because that will help deliver some of our cuts, and I think also, more importantly, deliver the objectives of the annual delivery plan. So bring something back next month.
Okay. And the first one on the list about the
yeah,
secondary
I mean,
preventions.
Erica touched on it earlier a wee bit. We have a sort of performance and outcome dashboard that comes to System Primary Care Committee. There have been quite a few changes through the planning guidance and recent letters from Secretary of State to General Practice. So we're looking to incorporate all of those in a revised dashboard that will come to System Primary Care Committee. So we can report that maybe through next month's Chair's report from Erica. I think it's important that Erica mentioned we have to submit a plan by the end of June, which looks at reducing variation in access across the ICB, and we'll be looking at that through System Primary Care Committee, but we'll be looking how we identify our spend of SDF around that, and we'll have to look at some differential investment.
Okay, so through the committee report, we'll understand some response to that question.
Yeah, thank you.
And Anthony?
Yeah, we're looking to take something into Quality and Performance Committee in April, Chair.
Okay, so that will come through the report, will it, in April?
Absolutely, yeah.
All right, thank you. Right, sorry for running late. Good meeting. I think we're closing the formal meeting here. Now let's have a bite to lunch, and I think for the private meeting, we're aiming to start at 1:45. But given that 7 minutes time, let's assume, what do we think?